G'day mates, it's Busta here, and before the video begins, I would like to give Audible a huge shout out for sponsoring this video. So, it's the time of year when everyone is travelling or running around getting thoughtful gifts for people that you care about. This year, think about giving yourself the gift of Audible membership, and now is the best time to do it with a special offer of 53% off your first 3 months. If you're unaware of what Audible actually is, it's basically a huge online library of audiobooks that is really unmatched in size and selection. They offer originals, broadcasters, news, comedy, audiobooks, and so much more. And Audible have been really generous in providing me with a link for you guys to sign up with and receive a pretty sweet deal. Right now, for a limited time, you can get 3 months of Audible for just $6.95 a month. That's more than half off the regular price. I actually recently signed up myself, and a title that I found and would recommend is World War Z by Max Brooks. It's a fantastic novel on the first-hand accounts of the survivors of a global zombie-like pathogen. It really is a captivating story, and I loved how it was paced by breaking up chapters into almost like mini-stories for each survivor's story. I'm still listening through the last title of the Passage trilogy by Justin Cronin as my free audiobook for the month. I'm almost finished now too, and I'm actually going to be taking it with me on my trip to see family for Christmas this year. Oh, and another thing that I personally loved about the Audible membership too is that at the beginning of every month, you can choose any audiobook as your free audiobook, and any titles that you choose, you actually own them. Which is great because you can go back and re-listen anytime, even if you cancel your membership. And the great thing is that your free audiobook for the month can actually be of any value, even if it's of higher value than the membership price itself, which is usually about $15 a month, and means you can save a ton of money. It also means that you have literally nothing to lose and everything to gain by signing up. You can also listen anywhere, anytime, on any device, enjoy easy audiobook exchanges, and even roll over credits. So right now, for a limited time, you can get 3 months of Audible for just $6.95 a month. That's more than half off the regular price, and choose 1 audiobook and 2 Audible originals absolutely free. To do that, all you have to do is visit audible.com/scared or text scared to 500-500. That's audible.com/SCARED or text SCARED to 500-500. I do hope you guys take up Audible on their generous offer, and without further ado, let's begin. So I was around 10 or 11 years old when this happened. Old enough to stay home alone, but not old enough to recognize some of the red flags. I attended a camp over the summer, the typical age of 3 routine. My house sits close to the end of my street, which forms a U as well, but for some reason the bus driver would never drop me off at my house. I would always get dropped off at the end of my street, where I would toddle myself along back home. Both my parents worked late hours, and sometimes not getting home until 8 p.m, and it would be very expensive to hire a babysitter for 4 to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, starting 6th grade, when the bus dropped me off at home, I would just be by myself. I'd do the usual middle school routine, play games online and watch some TV, and occasionally my neighbour's cat would come into my backyard, and I would feed and pet her as a way to get outside. The only computer in the house was in my dad's workroom, which has a window overlooking the deck, and a window overlooking the side of the house. We have large bay windows in the living room, dining room, and the kitchen of my house, and since we sit on a hill, you can pretty much see the entire backyard from a nice vantage point. So most days, when I get home, I'd toss off my backpack and go right to that room, and you could see me walk from my front door and pop up by the computer from the outside. Unfortunately, this would lead to something that I had forgotten about up until now. So when I got off the bus, I did as expected, go into my dad's workroom and play the computer games, and about 30 minutes into this, I can hear faint meowing coming from outside the window. I pause the game and look outside, thinking that maybe my neighbour's cat had wandered over, but there was nothing. I just sat back down and resumed playing, only to hear the meowing again. It was quiet but noticeable, and so I checked the other window. nothing again. This routine happened for a good 10 minutes, and eventually I got frustrated and went into the living room to watch some TV. But not even 2 minutes later, meowing came from the window that I was sitting right beside. Now, I was confused and honestly a little creeped out as well, so I shut the blinds and kept trying to watch TV. The meows continued, but only when they came from the window right behind me did I jump and leave the living room, officially skeeved. I went into my bedroom where the blinds were down, but still cracked for some sunlight. I tried to read a book, only to hear a meow come from outside of my bedroom window. This was enough to make me call my dad, concerned that maybe the cat was hurt, but I couldn't see it to be sure. He said that he would have a neighbor come to check it out and call me back later. 10 minutes go by and I get a call from my dad saying that he was coming home from work. There was nothing urgent in his voice, just that his job had gotten cancelled and he would come home early. I didn't think anything of it, and when he got home, I realized that the cat noises had stopped. Fast forward to the present, and I actually asked my dad about the strange incident, thinking that it was funny that the cat had followed me around like that. But what he told me next made my blood run cold. So after I called him, the neighbor did indeed come to check out the house, and what he found were large footprints leading in circles all around the house, clustered close to the wall so that even if I looked outside, I wouldn't see anything. Which means that someone had been stalking me through my house, seeing where I was through the windows, and making cat noises to try to get me to come outside. They must have known that I was home alone, since it was easy to see me walk by myself down the street and let myself in like that. My neighbor immediately called my dad and searched the property, but didn't find anyone. The police were never called, since there was nothing but footprints that led off into the woods and got lost, and I never saw anyone either. But my dad stayed home with me for the rest of the week. It sickens me, though, to know that there are people who would use these tactics to try and lure kids out of their homes, and from there, do whatever they wanted to do. So the story I'm going to share with you took place in the North Pole, Alaska, in May 20th. The incident that I'm going to describe was wrong place, wrong time, and completely unprovoked, which no one believes. Another note too, I was still only 20 when this incident occurred and could not legally own a pistol yet. Also, I was in the army, and if you live in the barracks, you have to keep your weapons in the arms room. So it's not like it's convenient to get that out and carry it around, as compared to a guy living off post who can keep his gun in a safe in the closet or something. I know people will wonder why I wasn't carrying. Those are the reasons, though. But anyway, here's my story. So on the night of Cinco de Mayo 20, I attended a party at a friend's house in the North Pole, AK. North Pole is about 20 to 30 minutes outside of Fairbanks. It's a somewhat rural community, lots of houses that are on 1 to 2 acre lots and mostly all dirt roads off the main road. I was the designated driver that night and drove 4 of my friends, but 3 of the friends that I brought decided that they were going to spend the night at that person's house instead of going back to the barracks. Only one friend that wasn't drinking a lot decided that he wanted to go back to the barracks when I was ready to go. So we ended up leaving at about 1:30 in the morning, I'd say, and as we were pulling into the front gate, we got a call that there had been a fight at the party. They said that after the fight, everyone was going home instead of staying the night and continuing drinking. They asked us to come back and pick them up, but said that they had went to a different friend's house that lived in that same area because everyone had to leave after the fight. Well, GPS doesn't work that well once you get outside of Fairbanks, and none on the main roads anymore. At least not with my Verizon service that night. You could get in the general area, but not always the exact location. When we went to the address that was given, it came up as being in the middle of the road, so we took a turn down a side road to turn around and try to get that service so that we could make a call to figure out where the house was. By this time, it was around 2:30 in the morning, and as we turned down the road, there was an old red minivan with fog lights mounted on top, just kind of idling there with 2 guys that looked to be in their late 20s inside of it. I remember thinking that it looked like something that you'd see on a TV show or a horror movie. Just a real creepy looking van, especially at almost 3 in the morning. We had to pass them though to turn around, and they looked at us in a way that gave us a really bad feeling. So we turned around and then had to pass them again to pull out onto the main road. As we passed them, the driver was leaning his head out of the window like he wanted us to stop so that they could ask us for something. But being that it was almost 3 in the morning, we knew that it was probably best to just keep on driving. But my friend wasn't able to get a hold of anyone too, so he tried mapping it out again. The GPS was delayed due to the poor service though, and we missed the turn again. We saw a small clearing to pull over at, so we pulled over on the side of the road to verify where we were at compared to the street that we missed. About 10 seconds later, the red minivan with the fog lights pulled up next to us on the driver's side and rolled down the window. I rolled my window down and they initiated conversation by asking if we had seen a white Dodge pickup. We said that we hadn't, and they said, "Okay, thanks." We then asked if they knew where Meadow Rue was, the street that we were looking for. They said that it was the first street on the left if we headed back the way that we just came. We were suspicious, but when we looked at the GPS, it showed that that was actually the road. We actually found out later that the road was on both sides of the main road. Note too that the locals outside of Fairbanks tend not to like the active duty military guys, and military guys, they stick out a lot due to the lack of a beard and long hair and having a military haircut and whatnot. We started heading toward Meadow Rue, which was about a half-mile away, and saw them pull out and started heading that way behind us. We made the turn into what we thought was Meadow Rue, and this road is a bumpy dirt road and immediately forks off into 2 directions. One side goes straight and up a slight hill, the other side is off to the left and drops down about 2 feet and flattens out. We turned left and dropped down the small incline. The road was narrow, only big enough for one car and lined with trees on both sides for a good distance. But the first thing that we noticed was a dead-end sign, and that was when we started to get worried. We drove about 20 feet, and then we see the minivan with the fog lights turn in and drop down behind us. At this point, my blood turned cold, and I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew that they were following us, and I tried to be positive and hoped for a split second that they'd hang back and turn off the first driveway or something, which we hadn't seen a driveway yet. But then I saw them speeding up. Again, this is a bumpy dirt side street, and there's no reason to be going fast. I start speeding up, and then they slammed into the back of my car, backed off, and then rammed me again. A few seconds later, we made it to a small clearing, like a dirt cul-de-sac. I had enough room to pull forward and then reverse myself back so that I was facing the direction that I just came. But while I was doing this, they stopped and blocked the 1-lane dirt road. They hopped out of the car and one of them shouted, "This ain't Meadow Rue, get the hell out of the car." The one guy had positioned himself directly in front of my car about 10 or 15 feet away between the trees and his van. The other guy started walking up to my passenger side where my friend was. They kept shouting at us to get out, but I just gunned it right at the guy in front of me, trying to run him over. He managed to jump out of the way, and I thought for sure there wouldn't be enough room between his van and the trees and figured that we'd get stuck, but we had no guns, so there wasn't a better choice. I thought that we'd have to bail out and run into the woods and hide, but to my surprise, we actually squeezed just through it. It was such a tight fit that both my mirrors collapsed in, but I then sped out of there, got on the main road, and headed for home. I had actually seen a state trooper not long before all of this, not too far down the road as well. I was scared to death of being chased again and then run off the road at higher speeds, so instead of slowing down, I blew past the state trooper while doing 90 in a 45, not exaggerating too. Since that is extreme speeding, I thought that I'd get the trooper's attention, but for whatever reason, it didn't. There was only one turn on the whole way back, and when I slowed down to make it, the van was nowhere in sight, thankfully. Still, I flew back at 90 miles per hour all the way, just to be safe. The next day, we tried to tell our friends what had happened, but nobody believed us, not one person. They thought that we didn't feel like driving all the way back to pick them up, so we made up some elaborate story to get out of it. The guy who had invited us all over originally said that if we were serious, that we needed to go and file a police report with the Alaska State Troopers. So we did. We went to file a police report at the state trooper's office in town. When we filed our report, after giving our story to the trooper, he told us to wait and then he left the room. About 15 minutes later, he came back in and told us to tell the truth. Confused, we asked him what he meant. He said his theory was that we were drunk, driving around late at night, partying, and we ploughed into the van that we described. He said that he thought the owner heard that happen and then came out and confronted us and we took off. He said to get ahead of the story, we made up the whole thing so we wouldn't get in trouble for wrecking into a car while drunk and leaving the scene. We repeatedly told him that that was not the case and said everything that we had told him was true. But without evidence to prove his theory, he just let us go. The next day he went and checked the area that we showed him on the map, and I guess when he didn't find a wrecked car that he knew that we were most likely telling the truth. He called and asked us to come meet him out there to verify that that was indeed the area, but we told him that we didn't want to go anywhere near there again. About 2 weeks after that, though, he called and asked us to come in and possibly ID the vehicle. He showed us a picture of a red minivan with fog lights, and we said that it looked just like the vehicle from the incident. He then told us that the vehicle was stolen sometime before that, and that it was taken from an old woman. These guys may or may not have been related to her, but the trooper said that if any arrests were made, that he would call us back. We never did hear any follow-up after that, though. To this day, no one really believes my story. They think that we just did something to provoke the incident, or just think that we made it all up to sound cool or something, but it was just a case of the wrong place, wrong time. So I'm a 25-year-old female, but this takes place when I was 12. I grew up in a pretty safe neighborhood, and this took place on a weekday. I was pretty sick too, like flu symptoms. At this point, I'd stayed home alone a handful of times. My parents didn't really like leaving me alone at 12 years old, but they really had no choice on this particular day. My mum worked early in the morning, like between 2:30 a.m., and didn't get off until about 10:30, and my stepdad was also working during the day. So I'm going to try and explain my house the best as I can because it's kind of important. So there are big windows in the front of the house, and the blinds and the curtains were open. The front door was most likely unlocked. I know that sounds horrible, but we lived in a place where bad things just didn't really happen. There are also 2 big tall windows on each side of the front door, so anyone at the front door can look right into the dining room and the living room. I never really thought anything of those windows. That is, until this happened. So it was sometime in the morning, and I was still in pajamas and my mum was still at work. There were no cars in the driveway when, all of a sudden, someone rang the doorbell. I was upstairs at the time, and I didn't get to the door right away. The person started knocking really hard on the door, and I looked from upstairs to see if I could see who it was that it was knocking. It sounded like a police officer, maybe. Unfortunately, because of those stupid big windows, I was able to see the man, and he also saw me. We made eye contact, so I felt really weird about not answering the door, and he knew I was home, so I decided to be brave and answer the door. I know, I was a stupid kid. But he pulled out a badge and showed me his business card, and he claimed to be a special investigator, and he needed to park in our driveway to wait on one of the neighbors that he was spying on. I just said to him, okay, sure, go ahead. He walked back to his car, and I locked all the doors and the windows, went upstairs and called my mum. She told me to hide in the closet and that she was calling the police. Luckily enough, my parents' house is right around the corner from a police club, where the police officers do target practice and stuff. And almost immediately, there were a total of 9 cop cars outside of my house. I was terrified, and an officer knocked on the door and scolded me for answering the door when I was home alone. They were also in the process of arresting the man in my driveway. He was armed, and I later learned that he was waiting on my stepdad to come home from work. I'm not really sure what he was going to do, but he did have a gun, so I guess you can put 2 and 2 together, right? I don't really remember much after that, but it was a terrifying experience. that's for sure. So, as a bit of background, my family lives in a state away from me, and at the time that this happened, I had just turned 18. I'm 21 and female now, and my mum would finally let me drive to go and see them, which was about a 5.5 hour drive away. But no biggie, I could do that, I thought. About halfway there, though, I needed to stop to get some gas and get some snacks and whatnot. I wasn't very familiar with the drive or where the gas stations were on it, and they were kind of spread out, so as soon as I felt like it wasn't smart to wait until another gas station came up, I pulled off the highway. Now, I've always been sort of suspicious of people in general because, well, I haven't had an easy childhood and I grew up learning to just kind of feel when things are not right. So I wasn't really worried about being by myself because I knew how to handle myself. I pull up to this relatively empty gas station, maybe one or two other cars, but it was a larger one with one of the antique shops in it. I parked at a pump, locked my doors, and I go inside. There was no one at the counter yet, and a sign was on the counter saying that they would be right back. So I go and pick out a snack and a drink, and, well, when I previously walked in, I noticed a man, late 20s, kind of just wandering in the store. I saw him glance over at me when I walked in, but didn't really think much about it. Not really paying much attention to him, I went and opened the door to the soda section, and was perusing them when he comes right up next to me and opens the one next to mine. This wasn't particularly weird to me, but the fact that he was literally all the way across the store when I came in, and then as soon as I go over there, he does too. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go look for a different drink. So I go to the tea section and stand there for a second, and he follows me to the one right next to mine again. Only this time, he looks at me, smiles a creepy-ass closed-lip smile, and says, "Hey." I do want to say that even though he could have easily just have been trying to be a nice flirt or something, I had an instant creepy vibe from him when he first walked over, and that intuition has never failed me before. At this point, I just looked at him, nod my head, grab something, and I go to the counter, thinking to myself that I can just grab a snack later. He comes up right behind me, though, with one of those jerky sticks. I literally didn't even grab anything from the refrigerators that he was looking in right next to mine, and just stands, like, really super close to me. And I mean, he was right up behind me, so much so that I could feel his body heat and his breath on the back of my neck. I'm literally just wanting this cashier to desperately come in here so I can get the hell away from this guy, so I start calling for someone. No one answers or comes out, though. The dude behind me is texting on his phone and looking around and at the door like he's waiting for someone. But finally, I'm like, screw it, I'm out. I leave my drink on the counter and I just walk out, and he follows me. At this point, I literally bolt to my car, and I remember feeling him grasp my jacket, but with the momentum of my arm swinging, he didn't get a firm hold. I hop in and I lock the doors immediately, turning my car on in record speed. We make eye contact, and out of the corner of my eye, I see two men run out from around the corner of the gas station. All three run at my car, which is not very far from where the first guy is, and I just floor it out of there, almost wrecking my car in the corner. I don't know what they were planning on doing, but I imagine that I was about to get kidnapped. I called the police because I don't know where the cashier was, and I just had a bad feeling that they may have done something to them. But when the police got there, the guys were gone, and the cashier was apparently fine. These days, though, I now carry my knife on me when I go on that drive. About a year or so ago, I heard a very timid knock on the door of my room at around 2 or 3 in the morning, I think. I opened the door, and standing there was my brother, 19. He looked visibly shaken, and he asked me, "Were you just outside a minute ago?" And I responded, "No, I haven't been outside in a while. Why?" My brother turned as white as a sheet, and he didn't respond right away, but needless to say, this really threw me off. Not a whole lot really bothers my little brother, and he's the kind of person who, if you kick open the door to his room with a gun in hand, he'll kind of nonchalantly ask, "What do you want?" He can whisk any sort of fear away with logic. Any sound, noise, or shape has a simple, logical explanation to him. I'm the same way, if I'm being honest. I mean, we're not really paranormal people. So when I eventually got out of him, I think that there's somebody outside. I just figured that it was a human. That's logical, right? What didn't make sense, though, was our area. We live in a fairly secluded neighborhood. There hasn't been a crime in the area for years now, not even a stolen Amazon package, so someone outside was a bit of a surprise to me. Regardless, though, I grabbed a weapon and I went to investigate. Now, our kitchen looks out on our backyard, and there's several large windows that allow you to see almost the entirety of my backyard. The natural light from the moon is almost perfect to where if you're standing in the kitchen you can see everything in the yard, but you can't be seen in the house. I've seen plenty of animals roam through my backyard at night while I was making coffee or getting a glass of water. My brother has also reported seeing things that looked human in the backyard before, so this wasn't new. But what was odd was I've never really seen him this scared before. So I go into the kitchen and I look outside, and nothing. I turn on the floodlights and I start to look around the yard. Again, nothing. I go back inside and I talk to my brother, and I don't remember the exact conversation, but it was something like, "There's nothing out there that I could find anyway." And he said, "Oh, I could have sworn that I saw someone." The colour had returned to his face and he was acting normal again, which put me at ease. And then I said, "What were they doing?" He said, "Just standing there." And I said, "That's weird. Well, you must have been seeing things, or they just ran off." I started to walk back into my room when my brother started to talk again, and he said, "I don't think it was human." I asked him, well, we don't have bears or anything around here anymore, so what do you think it was?" He said, "I don't know. Its eyes were red, though." We just sort of left it at that, and we both just kind of decided that it must have been a figment of his imagination or something, and that he was tired or something. We went to bed, but neither of us slept well that night. But the next night, I was awoken in the middle of the night by something. I'm a really light sleeper, so it honestly could have been anything, and I don't really remember, but I think it was the computer restarting. It makes a loud beep when it does so, and I don't know if that's important, but anyway, I left my blinds and my bedroom window open because it was raining and I liked the sound of the rain. However, the rain had stopped and it was getting really cold in my room, so I got out of bed to go and close the window. I glanced outside, and that was when I saw something. Something that looked like a person was just standing on the fence about 15 feet from my window. It was looking at me, and it had red eyes, just like my brother described. I was so startled that I actually fell back onto my bed. I got up and I looked out the window again, but I couldn't see anything. So I just kind of chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me, closed my window, and I went back to bed. Now, the last time, and this time I don't doubt what I saw, I was going to the kitchen to get a glass of water in the middle of the night. I glanced over out of my sliding glass door, and that was when I saw it again. It was about 7 feet tall, made of what looked like smoke or something, and it had human features, but none were defined. But it had bright glowing reddish-orange eyes, and it wasn't looking at me. It was looking at my sliding glass door handle and kind of swiping at it or something, as if trying to figure out how to open the door and get into my house. I snuck back into my room, grabbed a thing of salt that I had from dinner earlier and a Bible. My only real experience with the paranormal is the show Supernatural, so with my weapons in hand, I snuck back out there, only to find that this thing was gone, vanished without even a trace. I never saw anything like it again, and I really hope that I never do. My brother and I talked about it a couple of months later, and apparently the night that I saw something out my window, he saw something out of his window at roughly the same time in a similar circumstance. He also thought that he saw something in the backyard again just prior to my door experience. Apparently, he didn't say anything because he didn't want to deal with it. Kind of speaks to his personality, like I said. So, what was it? I have no idea. But after that, neither of us ever saw anything again. And to be honest, we both hope to keep it that way. So I want to share a story that happened when I was around 12. It was about 7-ish years ago, so the memory is a bit hazy, I'll admit, but with what I remember and what my family tells me, I have mostly pieced it together, I think. So, my parents got a divorce when I was around 4, and my little brother was around 2. This story begins when my mum, her current boyfriend, my brother and I moved into our new house. We were a happy family. Me and my brother loved the man that our mum was with, and it had been a bit since something paranormal had happened to me, other than randomly seeing things or talking about people that were there. But the first memory I have in that house that was scary, or that I remember seeing anything, is that it was summer and we'd been living there for a month or 2. I was excited for school, and I remember that it was late. Mind you, at my young age, that could have been 11 p.m. for all I know, and everyone had turned in for the night. I hadn't been able to go to sleep, so I turned on my lamp and pulled out a book. I don't know how much time had passed, but I had made it a few chapters before something stopped me. I heard humming, I think. It was soft and didn't seem like it was coming from my room, so I just tried to ignore it for a bit, but finally I figured that it might have been my mum, and I was hungry and I wanted a snack, so I got up and I put on my robe and left the room. Now, the lay of the house was that if you walked in through the front door, to your left would be the living room, walk forward a bit and you could either go forward into the dining room and the kitchen area, with the laundry room at the far end, or the right was to the hall. It was just a standard hall, but at that age, I felt like it was entirely too long. But anyway, so the first door on the right was my brother's room, with the bathroom across from him. And next on the right was my room, and the hall closet was across from me. Finally, at the end was the room that my stepsister would move in when my mum and her boyfriend got married later, and then my mum's room. So I left my room and I headed to the kitchen. The bathroom door was open and the light was off, and it really creeped me out. Mind you, I've always had a bit of a fear of bathrooms, no clue why, just do. But ignoring that, I finished walking to the kitchen and the light was off, so I flipped it on and my mum wasn't there, but the humming had stopped. I checked the living room and it was empty, so I decided to head back to the hall, going through the motions of closing the bathroom door and checking on my room, and then finally checking on my mum and her boyfriend. But when I did, all of them were asleep. Shrugging it off, I go to my room and I climb into bed. I wasn't completely tired, but I didn't think I could read anymore, so I just turned off the lamp and I curled up under the blanket. But sadly, I wasn't going to be going to sleep that night, because the humming had returned, louder this time, like it was right next to me, and instantly, cold fear was pouring through my veins. I asked if someone was there, and the humming paused for a second before it returned. Gathering some courage, I slowly turned and uncovered, but I didn't see anything, which I think scared me even more. Once again, I asked if anyone was there, and as my mum had always told me to do, I told them that they didn't need to be scared and that I wasn't here to do any harm. This seemed to cause the humming to once again go away, and it was gone for a few minutes, so I thought that I was okay. Laying in bed, I let out a deep sigh and was ready to sleep. My eyes were closed, and just as I was getting ready to drift off, I felt something breathe on me, followed by the feeling of something standing over me or beside me, just watching me. When I opened my eyes, I was looking at the vent above my bed, and I saw something, and it took me a second to register that it wasn't supposed to be there. Keeping my eyes on the vent, I reached over and flipped the lamp back on, revealing what seemed to be a shadowy face in the vent. It was there for a good few minutes as well, and I couldn't move and I couldn't speak. I barely felt like I could breathe. when finally I let out a cry or a scream, and it woke my mum up and she came running to my room. I was in tears because something about what I felt was truly scary and not like the normal stuff that I would see and hear, and I was truly scared at this point. My mum held me for a few minutes, and when I finally told her what I had seen, she told me that it was just a dream and nothing more. And slowly, I believed her. I figured the humming was just in my brain, filling in the silence, and the face was in my brain half asleep, but still, she let me go to sleep in her bed that night with her, which I was very thankful for. Now, this story could have ended there, and I didn't talk about it. My mum was the only one that heard about it because I thought it was a dream, and I didn't want to tell my baby brother because I didn't want to scare him. But about a month after it happened, at breakfast one morning, my brother made a comment that the night before, he had heard humming or singing almost, and then saw a dark shadow in the corner of his room. And the more that he stared at it, he noticed that it actually had a face. My brother had never had any issues before, and he knew that I sometimes saw things, and he thought that it was all fake, just me being a mean big sister. And it truly gave me goosebumps that my brother had heard what I had, and seemed to see close to the same thing. And I think this is when we knew that it wasn't just a dream, because there was no way that we both heard the same thing and saw something so similar without me prompting my brother, because there was just no way that we both heard the same thing and saw something so similar without me even needing to prompt my own brother. He wasn't the only one too, because I actually had a little cousin about 4 who came over one day and woke me up crying, saying that she heard someone humming and saw something in the vent. A friend said that she heard the same thing and then saw something while in the bathroom, and there was about 5 of us that went through this, each of them a few times, me about 10 times, and each time it started with the humming, sweet and motherly, and then the shadow would appear, sometimes just a face, and sometimes it was mainly a body, and then other times it was the face and the body, and it was hard to make out as well at other times. This all started the paranormal stuff in that house, and so many things happened, the things that I won't be able to fill in one post, but I'll definitely make sure to share more here for sure. Anyway, if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything, I'll try my best to answer them in the comment section below. Thanks for listening, and I hope you guys have a nice day. Until recently, I, a 22 female, was doing door-to-door election work, getting people registered to vote and stuff like that, and had to quit because I was made acutely aware of just how easily I could end up in a very dangerous situation. At my job, we all got driven out in a van to different areas and dropped off alone for about 8 hours until we got picked back up. We each had an iPad with a list of addresses and the names of the people living at those addresses, as well as their age and gender, so we generally had an okay idea of whether or not the person who answered the door was the person who we were looking for. Quite often, though, a family member would answer the door and then go and get the person that I was trying to speak with, so having a random person answer the door wasn't completely unusual at all. It was also an unusually cold day and was around 8 PM, so already dark. So, when a guy in his late to mid-20s asked me to step inside for a moment while he got his father, who was the person that I was looking for, I felt a little uneasy, but I didn't want to be rude, especially since he asked me if I needed water or a bottle or anything. After I stepped inside, though, he closed the door, saying that he didn't want to let the heat out, and then said that he was going to get his father from the kitchen. While I was waiting for them to come back, I stepped further in, away from the door so that I could pet his dog, who was very friendly. And all of a sudden, I realized the guy was just behind me, in between me and the door, because I'd walked forward towards the dog, and there was a hallway running perpendicular to the direction of the front room that ended close to the front door, if that makes sense. This guy then told me that he'd been mistaken, and his dad actually wasn't at home. I honestly think that my brain just froze for a couple of minutes because I just kind of stood there, staring at him and unable to understand what was happening. The guy then started asking very personal questions, and the way that he was talking and his body language was much more intimidating and brazen than it had been before. I'm 5'8" and around 120, so not tiny, but this guy was a big guy. In the middle of him talking about how it's dangerous for a nice girl like you to be out by myself at night, and how I should really be more careful, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway, and pretended like I knew who it was and that they worked with me. It was actually a telemarketer, and I've honestly never been happier to get a call from anyone, really. As I was on the phone, I mentioned the address that I was at and thanked them for being on their way. The guy tried to laugh it off and even told me to remember what he said about staying safe out there, but I honestly think that I would have been attacked if I hadn't have gotten that spam call. The scariest thing to me, though, was realizing later that he probably pretended to go look for his father out of my line of sight, just so that he could get a weapon or something, because otherwise, why not just grab me as soon as I stupidly stepped inside? It was a near miss. Of that, I'm convinced. I was in grade 8, and it was summertime, so it was really hot out. It was late at night, probably around 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. or something. I was trying to sleep, and my window was open because my room was hot. I had a screen on my window so that the bugs couldn't get in, obviously. So I was dozing off, about to fall asleep, when I heard something up against the house underneath my window. It sounded like a faint banging, maybe. I tried to ignore it, as sometimes parents have squirrels that run along their houses and whatnot. But then it got louder and closer, and I sat up in my bed trying to examine the sound, and it continued. I then called for my mum, as her bedroom was across the hall, and the sound just instantly stopped. My mum came in and told me to go back to sleep as she didn't hear anything, and so I went back to sleep without incident. In the morning, I woke up and carried on with my day. My mum had to do some yard work, so she went outside in the backyard. A few minutes later, she came rushing back inside into my bedroom. I was confused, so I followed her and asked what was wrong. She didn't answer, but then in a panic, she went downstairs to talk to my dad. And it turns out that there was a 6-foot ladder resting up against my bedroom window, and the screen of my window was cut wide open, as if someone had taken a knife to it. My parents called the police, but nothing ever came of it, and I often wonder what would have happened to me if I didn't wake up and call for my mum that night. So this happened around 9 years ago when I was 11. There was a girl at school called Amy who didn't have many friends. She was very quiet, and honestly I thought that she was a bit strange, but I felt like it would be a nice thing to befriend her. We got talking, and she actually turned out to be really nice, and we became best friends rather quickly. It got to the point where I spent pretty much every weekend at her house, and then we would walk to school together as well. Even at my age, I knew that there was something weird about her dad, though, Kevin. He was very interested in me, it seemed, and always tried to play fight and stuff, which is weird in itself. Whenever he was around, I also felt weird. He was a short, fat man with grey white hair, always had a weird smirk on his face and really wide eyes. It started off with stealing bits of my food when I wasn't looking, and then laughing and making sure to put his arms around my shoulders to apologize. He'd always be wherever we were, upstairs, downstairs, or garden, and he just kind of always lurked about. There was a day, too, where Amy's nan was visiting, Amy's mother's mum, and Kevin kissed her nan on the mouth, hello, which was weird. Then it turned into the creepiest and sloppiest French kiss that I'd ever seen. Everyone except me and Amy found it funny. She put on a smile when her family looked over, but I was horrified. Maybe I shouldn't have gone back, I know, but I felt like I had to, for Amy's sake. After that, there was a day where we were playing in her room, and Kevin came in and started an argument over nothing. It got heated, and he grabbed a rubbish bag saying that he was going to throw all of her toys away. Of course, an 11-year-old is going to go mad if they think their dolls are being thrown away, so she was hysterical. We followed him downstairs, where he told her that if she spoke to him like that again, she would regret it. It was then that he started to remove his belt, and I mean, what the hell, right? She pushed me towards their front door, which is just in front of the stairs, so we could run out of it, but she was sort of half laughing as if she was trying to convince me that it wasn't serious. I could tell that it was, though, but I got to the door, and when I turned around and waited, Kevin slammed it shut. But not the porch door, and then all I heard was Amy screaming at the top of her lungs. I was scared, but I didn't want to leave her, and so I just kind of stood there. Eventually, I found the courage to go back in, and I went upstairs to Amy, who was brushing her doll's hair. She smiled at me, but she had a tear-stained face. There were no visible marks, but all there was on show were her arms, so he could have really hit her anywhere. I then felt as if I had to protect her, so I continued going there, and didn't tell my mum a thing. One night I woke up thirsty, and we were close enough for me to just go get myself a drink, so I went upstairs, and Kevin was laying there, on the floor, in the dark, with nothing but tighty-whities on, and he just kind of weirdly stared at me. It was the creepiest thing, too. Just the street lamp from outside shining through a gap in the blind lit up the room enough to see, and I didn't get myself a drink. I just ran back upstairs. I wouldn't go there after that until I knew for sure that he wouldn't be there, and I didn't sleep over anymore, too. Anyway, I was talking to Amy recently, and she actually opened up to me because she sent me her mental health assessment sheet. And when she was 10, she woke up to Kevin, well, you can probably guess the rest, her 15-year-old sister. Kevin isn't her sister's dad, but not like that makes anything better, right? Who was screaming for Amy. It also stated that he beat Amy on a regular basis. Her most recent was 2 years ago. He beat her up in front of a friend, and her friend called the police. I told her the things that I'd seen, and how I knew that something just wasn't right. All I know of him now is that he's in hospital suffering with COPD, and quite honestly, I don't care. We moved into a new house when I was 10-ish years old. There was nothing special about the house, but I got a room in the basement which was way bigger than my old room, so I was thrilled. That didn't last long because the very first night that we slept there, come bedtime, I headed to my room. And as soon as I got to the stairs, I instantly regretted picking that room. It was dark and secluded, and it really freaked me out at night. But I made my way downstairs and I climbed into bed. I fell asleep and I wake up at about 2 or 3 in the morning to hear a girl sobbing. It scared me pretty badly, but it was coming from the side of the room. The door was on, so I dare not make a run for it. The crying goes on for 5 to 10 minutes and then slowly just kind of winds down. I finally calm myself and eventually I go back to sleep. This happens every single night for months. I didn't want to tell my parents, so I asked my brother to sleep in the room with me, and every time that he slept in my room with me, not a sound. It's frustrating, but weird enough that I finally just kind of got used to it. Sometimes I wouldn't even wake up, but I know deep down that it was occurring while I was sleeping. Then, a few months later, I started dreaming of a girl in a wedding dress, but it looks like she was in a car accident. She was disfigured and scary as hell to me. She would always be sitting holding something, but in the dream I was always too scared to look. This dream also kept reoccurring for quite some time until the sound and the dream were pretty much every night's events. And this goes on and on and on, and as time passes, it bothers me less and less. Then one night, I wake up and I hear the same sobbing. I roll over and try to go back to sleep, but before I can notice the cry starting to switch, it slowly goes from crying to this deranged laugh. This freaks me out badly for some reason. I panic and I get up and I run towards the door, even if it is towards the sound. I get to the door and the sound is right next to me. I don't know if the door was locked or if I was just panicked, but I couldn't open it too, and I started screaming and screaming at the top of my lungs. I hear the footsteps of my parents running towards me. I hear them running down the stairs, and I'm in complete panic. The door starts shaking like they're trying to open it, and as this is happening, I feel someone grab my arm, and at that, I just lose it. I'm ripping at the door and trying to get it open with my parents on the other side. I get it to finally open, expecting my dad on the other side. When I do, there's nobody there. The door is open though, so I run upstairs screaming and crying. Now that I'm upstairs, my parents finally hear me and they come out of their bedroom. I tell them everything and they just kind of look lost. But I told them right there and then that I would never go back down there again, and they let me start sleeping in the living room. I never heard it again after that, and I never really went back downstairs too. Months later, we moved, and I kind of got over it, but that was definitely one of the scariest moments of all of my childhood. I met Carter at a convention, and right off the bat, he kind of scared me. I heard rumors that he'd nearly been removed from the extremely liberal convention, but he seemed nice enough and kind of lonely, so I decided to befriend him since he insisted. But then I noticed that he was always just kind of nearby. When I was walking to my hotel, he was there. When I was eating lunch, he was there. When I was in my private group, he waited outside the door. But when I went to meetings, he went too and sat beside me. He usually either walked up to me and started a conversation, which ended in awkward silence, or just kind of stared at me from 50 yards away. I couldn't believe that he was really following me, so I went to my hotel, disguised myself, and went outside to see if he was there. And he was. And I mean, literally lurking in the trees nearby. He pressured me into giving my number, so I gave him a fake one. He found my professional information and begged me to look over his work, which I declined. He asked if I'd be at a party, and I lied and said no. He showed up anyway. Somehow he knew that I decided to go. He always talked about how lonely and depressed he was too, and how I was a lifeline. Until, on my way home from the convention, I had no phone service during the flight. He freaked out and spammed like 49 messages until ending with, "Okay, fine, I'm going to end myself now, just so you know," strongly implying that it was my fault for not answering him immediately. I told him to call 911. I then blocked him. He contacted me through Instagram, Hangouts, email, and more, but I never replied. In fact, I asked the convention security to speak with him about his creepy behavior, and I was told to just turn your phone off. Fast forward a few months though, and I get an email from James asking me to look over his work. Not a big deal. I run a program specifically for this sort of thing. I agreed since his email was very polite and well worded, but he seemed pushy in a way that I couldn't figure out. I ignored it, reviewed his work, and ceased communication. But you can probably see where this is going, right? So a little while later, he confessed that it was Carter all along. He put all the blame on me and apologized in a really horrible and kind of manipulative way, begging me once again to review his work. I never replied, and here we are. So, I just got back home from an appointment in town, and I can't seem to shake what I saw on the ride back. I was sitting in the passenger seat, and it was around 8 p.m. at this point, so it was pretty dark out. I live in an area with a lot of homeless people, so it's not uncommon for me to pass by them roaming around at night. I was just kind of staring at the window, super absent-mindedly, my eyes not even fully focused on the images going by, when I saw this older woman walking around by herself on the sidewalk. She had headphones on over her ears, and she was in dirty clothing with a bunch of blankets draped over her shoulders. She was smiling and kind of pointing at something above her. She was laughing too, looking like she found whatever it was above her to be pretty amusing. I barely registered it because I just kind of assumed that it was another homeless person on drugs seeing something that wasn't there. But when I passed by, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something floating above her head, right where she was staring and pointing up at, and honestly, it looked like the bottom of someone's feet. It was like someone was standing right above her, wearing a long and ragged cloak. That's all I could make out from my view from the car window, but my eyes didn't even focus on it. And when I realized what I saw, I searched in all the mirrors and turned around in my seat to get a better look, but there was nothing there. And I mean, there wasn't even anything. No lampposts, no lights, nothing. Nothing that could have been mistaken for what I saw near the woman, at least. There was only one of those tall wooden posts for electrical lines further down the street, but that was it. Now, the only explanation that I can think of is that the power of suggestion made my eyes play tricks on me or something. I'm a believer in the paranormal for sure, but I'm also very skeptical when it comes to personal experiences like this because I know the mind is very good at making things up. But I just keep thinking about it, and I know that there was nothing else on that street. I also know what I saw. Does anyone know what this might have been? I have no idea why now, out of all times, that I would see something like this, and why there was a woman that seemed to be able to see it too. The whole situation just has me really confused. So back when I was around the age of 14, I lived with my dad, my 2 older brothers, and my older sister in this small house that we used to call the greenhouse. It had a fairly big backyard for our 4 blue-nosed pits to enjoy, and a regular-sized front yard, but a small living space inside the house. Although old, it was a cozy place and felt quite welcoming as a whole. In many ways, one night, all of my siblings were in the boys' room, my brother's room, playing on their PS3, and I, for some reason, didn't want to be in there, so I went into the living room, which is right outside the boys' room. I say for some reason because when I was younger, I was very scared of being alone in the dark, so that was pretty unusual for me to do. All the lights off were in the rooms, and I was just kind of sitting on the couch playing with my sister's DS. I was playing a SpongeBob game, and that was my whole source of light. I'm sitting in the corner, and to the left of me is my brother's room, and straight in front of me is the doorway to the kitchen. In the middle of playing on the DS, I just pointed the screen at the doorway of the kitchen to light it up so that I could see, but there was nothing. It wasn't like a force or impulse that made me point the light, but more of an unconscious movement. After no more than 20 seconds had passed, I did it again and pointed my sister's DS to the doorway. But this time, I saw her. She was a young girl crawling with her hands and feet across the doorway, upside down on my ceiling. She had long black hair that dangled, her eyes were dark red, but her body was very pale, and it looked as if her body glowed a bit. She stopped in the middle of the doorway like a deer caught in headlights. I could see her whole body, and she turned her head, and we made eye contact. I don't know how long I stared at her emotionless, but after some time, I shot my hand down to hide the light, and after a few seconds, I pointed it back up, and she was just gone. I remember that I kept asking myself over and over again, why didn't she scare me? Why didn't I feel scared when we were making eye contact? It confused me a lot, and after sitting there for a bit, I called out for my sister to go into the kitchen and turn on the light. It confused me a lot, and after sitting there for a bit, I called out for my sister to go out to the kitchen and turn on the light. The light switch was right under the spot the little girl was crawling around. She was skeptical but went and turned it on anyways, and after she did, I got up to investigate, but after finding nothing, I confessed to what just happened. I know that it was really messed up for me to send my sister in there blindly like that, but I hope you can understand that I was worried afterward and needed some comfort and reassurance from the light being turned on. To this day, I really don't know what I saw or if it was all just in my head or what. All I know is that, whatever it was, this girl had an emptiness to her. I don't know if she meant any harm, and I never actually saw her again after that. I experienced many more paranormal events, but not in the greenhouse, so I don't know. The whole situation is a strange one for sure. This happened back in the 90s when I was still in primary school, so I really had no clue how much danger I was actually in. I would have been around 11 years old, I think, living in a regional city of Australia. And for the last year, I had been having a lot of trouble at school, getting bullied a bit by classmates and whatnot, and felt really singled out by my teacher as well. My mum, she worked around the corner from my school, so when everything would get too much at school, I would literally just walk out of class, down the road and onto her work site. It would take me about half an hour to walk there, along a main road. A couple of times I noticed a small white car drive past me slowly, but I only noticed this because I would see the same car go up and down the street as I was walking and while I was sitting outside of my mum's work site too. So after a while, I started seeing this car driving up my street at home and parked along the street as well that my brother and I would ride our bikes around in. I don't remember thinking that it was strange because it was a small town and it wasn't unusual to see the same cars or people. It was just like, oh, there goes that car again. My family followed a serious routine. Mondays were swimming and tutoring, Tuesdays were netball training, Wednesday netball game, Thursday basketball training, Fridays we would go and see a professional basketball or football, depending on the season, game. Saturday was my brother's basketball games, and Sundays were our day to go to the river with friends for swims and a barbecue lunch. And that never really changed unless someone was sick. So one Friday night, I'm dressed and ready to go watch this basketball game, but I can't find my shoes. I'm pretty sure that they're in the car, which is in the garage under our 2-story house, and to get to it, I have to walk down the outside steps at the front of the house, which has a full view of the road. I walk out the front door, and at the end of our driveway is a small white car. Now, I've never taken that much notice of the white cars up until this point, and it wasn't uncommon for cars to park in this exact spot for our neighbours, but I just, for some reason, got a sinking feeling in my stomach when I looked at it. I kept walking down the stairs, and as I got closer to the bottom, the driver's side door opens and a man gets out quickly. I keep walking towards the garage, and he starts moving towards our driveway. And that was the point when something inside me just told me to scream for my parents and run and lock myself in the car. I did exactly that, and this guy, who was halfway up my driveway at this point, turned around and ran back to his car and just drove off. By the time my parents came out, there was no evidence that this had actually happened, and, of course, they didn't believe me. A week later, though, there was a notice in our school newsletter about a man in a white car attempting to abduct another child from my school on the same night. My parents were very shaken by this and took me seriously after reading that. I don't think that he was ever caught, but it definitely taught me to listen to my intuition and take notice of my surroundings from that point on. So, this was a hike up to Half Dome. We had a campground about 20 minutes drive away from the trailhead, and the group was composed of me, 18-year-old male, my uncle, 32-year-old male, and my uncle's friend, D. There were 2 girls too with us, but they aren't really relevant to the story. So, my uncle and his friend are both Christians, so there were no substances consumed that would induce the feelings that I'll be talking about. We get to our campsite too, and we set up camp and go to sleep after eating. We plan to wake up at 4 and start hiking by 4:30, but for some reason I just randomly wake up at 3:30 in the morning, like completely wide awake, and look out of my hammock, and I remember feeling this really odd feeling as if I was woken up by something. And I remember looking at the moonlit scene. The moon was very bright for some reason, and thinking to myself that the whole thing just kind of looks like a dream. I lay back in my hammock, but I can't go to sleep, and end up waking up my uncle and my friend at 3:50. My uncle asks me, "Were you walking around at night?" This is important, but I say no and ask why. He says that he woke up for some reason and could hear someone walking around. Not like an animal, but a person. I say, weird, and in the end we just kind of brush it off. We get to the trailhead around 4:30, and as everyone is unloading the car, D says that he's going to use the bathroom, which there are a couple of them before the trailhead. I walked behind him for some time before falling behind and waiting for my uncle, who forgot something in the car. The short straight road from the parking lot runs directly into a T intersection with the road to the trailhead, and the bathroom is directly across from the intersection through the field a little. Those who have been there will know what I'm talking about. We get to the intersection and wait for D to come out of the bathroom. We wait for about 10 minutes before I go and check the bathroom, and he just isn't there. I get back to my uncle and tell him that, and he says, weird, and maybe he went back to the car or something, and we decide to wait a bit more. By 5:10, we begin to worry a bit, and my uncle goes to check out the car while I wait at the intersection to make sure that we don't miss him if he went down the road or something away from the trailhead. My uncle returns and says that he isn't there either. We decide that maybe he went up the trailhead without us for some reason, and walk up there in about 10 minutes. He isn't there either, and we're just kind of baffled now because there's just no other logical places that he would go. I decide to turn back and check the car and the bathroom again, but I meet him halfway before I get to the intersection. He's sweaty and disheveled with a weird look in his eyes, and I say, "Where have you been?" And he says that he went to the bathroom, and when he got back to the intersection, that we weren't there, and that he just assumed that we went to the trailhead and started walking and then met me. I say, "What do you mean? We waited at the intersection for over an hour and a half and checked at the car, the bathroom, and the trailhead, and you weren't anywhere." He says, "Well, I don't know. I just went to the bathroom." He then asks me where my uncle is, and I say at the trailhead, and he asks me again. I tell him again, and note that it was weird that he asked me twice. As we're crossing the bridge to the trailhead, he sees a light off on the riverbank and exclaims, "Oh, maybe that's him." And I just look at him and kind of keep walking. I thought that his behavior was really strange, like he wasn't thinking straight or something. We finally get on with the hike, and it goes by as normal, except that we seem to keep losing things, such as my uncle's small red flashlight, one of the girl's gloves, a water bottle, etc. It was kind of like we just simply forgot about the items and couldn't remember where we could have left them. On the way back, it got really dark, and we turned on our flashlights, and as we near the end of the hike, after the two waterfalls, it begins to seem as if we'd been walking for far too long, and my uncle also confirms this, asking me, "Doesn't it seem like it's been way too long to get back?" I say, "Yeah, I was just thinking that." We keep walking, and it still seems that we weren't making any kind of progress, if that's the right word. I've been on that trail many times, and as I was walking, I couldn't spot any familiar landmarks. It was just really weird, and there was this odd feeling in the air too, sort of a slight menacing feeling. It's hard to describe, but I remember thinking that it feels like the woods are alive. We remark 3 more times about how long this hike is taking and begin to laugh at it because it just felt so ridiculous. After a bit, we finally and suddenly find ourselves on the final stretch, and we eventually make it back to the car. Now, all of this seemed odd at the time, but I just kind of brushed it off. And I only realized just how weird those events felt after we got home, and my aunt asks my uncle, "Were you camping?" And he says, "Yeah, how did you know?" As we didn't tell them that we were going since it was kind of last minute. She says that she had this odd dream where she sees my uncle in a tent in a forest somewhere and someone is outside of his tent. She says that she couldn't see who it was, but knew that there was a presence there, and then she woke up at around 3 and had the strong urge to pray for him, and she did. My uncle kind of looks at me after that like, "Are you hearing this?" And I honestly don't know what to make of any of this, but I wanted to post it here because I would love to hear your opinions. What do you guys think? This happened about 13 or 14 years ago in my home country, the Dominican Republic. I'm 30 now, so it was a while ago, but I've never been able to get it out of my head. So, It was spring break, and a group of friends and we went up to our friend's dad's house in the mountains. It's a town called Constanza, and it's the highest settlement in the country, sitting at about 1,200 meters, around 4,000 feet. The house is a bit higher up, as it's located roughly 45 minutes from town going up a straight mountain. It's the highest house in the area, in fact. And there was around 5 or 6 of us, and we'd been hanging out for a few days up there. Just having fun, barbecuing, playing pool and having a few beers, just kind of kicking back. On the 3rd or 4th day, we were all tired since we spent the day walking and horse riding. At around 10 p.m, everyone was out cold, except for my friend, a son of the owner's house, and I. We'd been pals for a while, and we'd been up there a handful of times before. We always used to stay up late and hang up around on the terrace and the deck, talking about just random stuff, really. We had already been out there for a while at this point on these reclining patio chairs, and we were looking at the sky and literally counting the shooting stars. But they're so common up there that it became a sort of game for us. When suddenly, a huge, when compared to the other stars at least, white circular light appeared in the sky. I really don't know how to describe the size, but I want to say that it looked like 15 or 20 times the size of a regular star or a faraway airplane light or something. It didn't appear to be close. In fact, it kind of looked like it was far away. But this light just kind of sat there, completely still. We asked each other if we were seeing the same thing, but we didn't talk much after. It felt kind of entrancing or something, and we both fell silent just looking at it for about a minute. Out of nowhere, this light just starts bouncing around the sky at an incredible speed over a huge distance in the sky. The best way I can describe it is that it moved like the ball in Pong, the old school video game, inside what looked like a defined area, kind of like a square or a rectangle. The bouncing around went on for about 30 seconds or so, and then it just kind of disappeared. No trace of the light whatsoever, and nothing. But here's the weirdest part. So, after this, we just immediately felt sleepy. We were actually dozing off in a matter of seconds, and I don't remember who said that we should go to sleep, or if any of us actually said it, but we stood up and we just went to our rooms. And that night, I had the most vivid and realistic dream that I've ever had, and that's what keeps me awake at night. This dream was just different. I remember being on a spaceship, moving on top of a river. I never felt scared or in danger or anything, but I never saw anyone or anything else either. But I did feel a presence there with me. I was standing in the front part of the ship, in front of a huge window just looking out. We were moving slowly on top of this river, floating or flying, and it looked like the river was coming to an end, kind of like a waterfall, when we reached the end, and we just kept on flying, and I could see this amazing view, just tons of waterfalls, and each had structures and buildings on the rivers, and it looked like a futuristic city built on those rivers and the surrounding lands, and it was amazing, truly amazing. I didn't see much else after that, but one of the most bizarre things is that I heard or felt numbers. It was a long sequence, which I think were coordinates or something similar that they were trying to tell me. I woke up and I still remember those numbers, similar to when you wake up and remember a dream very vividly, but forget almost instantly. I stood up kind of dazed and confused and went looking for something to write, but I forgot them before I could do anything. A lot of years have gone by since then, and I'm still convinced that these beings were trying to tell me where they were and who they are. I'm not sure why they need to tell us, human beings, where they are or why they chose me, but I do believe it. I've never had any other paranormal, ghost, abduction, or otherworldly experiences since or after it, so this one has obviously really stuck over the years. But I just wanted to share my experiences and hopefully find others who may have had similar ones. This happened when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My mother was a dealer for Coca-Cola at the time in the rural regions of my city, so that means that she and her fellow employees would be delivering crates of Coke to little villages in the boonies pretty regularly. On this particular day, no deliveries were scheduled, and anything that was to be delivered was already done, so we were all just kind of all hanging out at the warehouse. My mum figured since it was the end of the week, let's all go out on a little road trip with the crew. Everyone agreed, and then one of the crew suggested that we go to this new inland resort a couple of towns over. It was nothing fancy, just a large area with a few pools, a pond, where you can catch your own catfish for meals and whatnot, and bamboo huts along the side. We all get in the truck, and off we go. We arrive sometime in the early afternoon, and Mum is telling members of the crew what to do. One books a hut, one gets our staff in order, and someone to keep an eye on me. While I look around, never wandering too far, I see an old lady, maybe in her late 50s or maybe 40s, I suppose, looking at me. I was a friendly kid, so I waved and smiled. She just stared at me, so I told the crew member who was looking after me, who in turn told my mum. She informed everyone to watch out for her and to make sure someone always has eyes on me. We proceed on merrymaking, and Mum's swimming in the pool, Mum and the crew are having a few drinks and eating some catfish. This dragged on till maybe 6 or 7 o'clock in the afternoon. I stayed in the pool the majority of the time and would just come up for a bit of soda, but on my last attempt to jump in, I see from the far end of the pool that same old lady. I immediately tell my mum, who looks in her direction and tells everyone that we're packing up and we're going back to the warehouse. We get back, and Mum requests that 3 of the guys stay the night at the old house, and if they could stay up one at a time just to be safe. Sometime in the middle of the night, though, I get woken up to my mum telling me to be quiet and follow her to one of the bedrooms in the back and to leave my slippers so we don't make any noise. I ask why, and she pointed out to the other side of the gate, and there was that same lady. She insists that I go to one of the rooms at the back of the house and stay there till she gets me. I follow and then hear her wake the crew up. I hear them leave the house and confront the lady by the gate with questions like, "Who are you? What do you want? How did you follow us?" But Mum said that she just glared at them while mumbling and now and then would crane her neck, looking past them as if to look for someone. She eventually leaves, and in the morning I'm taken back to the city to my actual house, while my mum went back to the town to continue her job and inform the local authorities of this person. We never did see the lady again, and it's been 20 years since then, but I asked my mum about the old lady again and whatever happened to her report. And she said that she and the 3 crew members that confronted her went straight to the town hall before they started on work. It's a small town, so it wasn't that hard to find someone via description, and they did find out who she was. The local authorities went to this little bamboo hut on the edge of town about a mile or so into some wooded area. The plan was to give her a warning, but when they got to the hut, nobody was in. They checked the windows, but nobody was inside or around the area. Someone did live there because there were ducks and chickens in a small pen on the side of the house. But they just decided to leave and update Mum later in the afternoon. And nothing really ever happened after that because they never saw anyone at that house again. So I've been working as a guard for a few months, and I noticed noises and just odd occurrences since my first day there. The layout of my patrol is a 2-part office building, one side, the north side, using only a floor for offices, the second floor and the first floor for storage for spare chairs and cubicle walls. The other side, the south side, is abandoned when the company housed in that section moved to a new location, both floors being full with cubicles, chairs, desks. The posters date there to about 2013, I think. There's no files or personal property. All of that stuff is in the south section, but the lights don't work properly due to the weather damage in 2016. So when I start my patrol, I start on the bottom floor of the north offices, which is mostly barren aside from a tornado shelter, cubicle walls stored against a wall, and the janitor's supply room. Down on this floor, though, I felt my jacket grabbed more than once while checking the area. The second floor where the offices is more active than the bottom floor though, where chairs move and roll into the hallway and the sound of the filing cabinet slams shut all the time. But when I check to see if anyone is around, I find some half open and papers on the floor. The south building is the worst one though. The first day that I did a patrol, I had chairs, not desk ones with wheels, move positions more than once. And while I would like to blame my co-workers, only 2 people have keycards to that building, security and maintenance. When I'm on the top floor, I have heard office doors slam, and when I investigate to find the doors, I routinely hear footsteps upstairs. My co-workers have claimed to hear voices and seen shadows as well. The closest thing that I've had happen besides the sounds was a flashlight, new batteries that I replaced the day before, constantly flickering on the bathroom floor of the south building, and returning to normal when I leave. I'm actually going to try investigating some more of this sometime on Tuesday. I'm going to try and take a digital recorder in and see if anything happens. I'll also try to replicate the flashlight issue and see if it was just a hardware thing or not. Anyway, if you guys have any good tips on what I should do or what is the best way to try and capture this stuff, I'm all ears. This happened in summer school when I was in 7th grade. On the first day that I arrived there, I went to my science class. Everyone there introduced themselves, and honestly, nobody seemed too off. I was kind of excited, in fact, to do some work, which was weird for me. But here's when the person in question shows up. He's late, and he looks like your stereotypical nerd. His name was Henry. The first day he actually doesn't do anything wrong or weird, but that changed quickly. The second day, the teacher is passing out iPads for us to use. Every day we would log what we learned, or do mini assignments on them. And she explains the project that we'll be doing on them. After everyone's finished, she collects them. Then, when she picks Henry's, she gets agitated with what she sees on it. He was watching porn, the third day, and this is when he starts interacting with me. We have to draw for an assignment, so I'm just minding my own business doing that. Then he walks up to me and he's like, "Wow, that's really good." He was also really loud whenever he talked. I said thanks and thought that would be the end of it, but no. We have a bathroom break a few minutes later, and I'm waiting outside to use the bathroom. There's more than one stall, but we have to go one at a time, and he's waiting too. He starts talking to me and telling me how cute and shy I am. I cannot stress this next part enough, though, that whenever he got near me, he'd punch my shoulders playfully. Like, it was so obvious that he just wanted some way to touch me, and after I go to the bathroom, we go back to class and nothing else happens there. Then it's lunchtime, and this is the real kicker. I'm walking up to the lunch line, and guess who's there? Yep, it's Henry. I'm keeping my head down, so hopefully he wouldn't notice me, but no such luck. He says to me, "You look like you want to die." I honestly don't know what to say to that, but then I say, "I do, haha," and then he then pulls up his sleeve on one of his arms and is like, "Well, at least you don't have these." And then he puts faint lines on his wrists. They were self-harm scars, and obviously this kid was pretty messed up. So I go through the lunch line with him in front of me, and he quietly murmurs to himself and attempts to talk to me a little. I go to sit down at a table. I didn't have any friends there, so I look lonely, and he sits next to me. I'm watching YouTube on my phone, and he pulls out my hand and asks what I'm watching. I say Dr. Phil, and he's like, "Haha, wow, that's so stupid." I didn't reply. He just sat super close to me, though, watching me eat for a few minutes, and eventually he finally leaves. I go to the bathroom after lunch, and turns out he followed me into the bathroom. Before I get into the stall, I turn around because I hear footsteps, and I yell at him, and he bolts out. I tell my teacher, and he's kicked out from summer school for now, but this is really starting to creep me out. When I was 4, way back in the 1950s, I went down to the bank restroom in the basement. I was doing my business on the porcelain throne when an adult foot nudged my foot under the stall wall. Irritated, I kicked back at the foot. And the next thing I knew, an adult was cajoling me to open the stall door and let him in. I got very frightened, and I didn't know what to do. The stall was up against the wall, the first one in line. The creepy man forced the door open, which I was putting my shoulder against, and when it gave way, I was knocked flat on my back on the floor. Looking up from the floor, I saw a very serene and dignified old man, with grey-white hair stuck up out of the wall. With a very sinister smile, he said to my attacker, "His father is going to be down here in about 30 seconds. Believe me when I tell you this, you don't want to be here when he arrives." Whether of shame at getting caught in such an act or stunned by a man stepping out of the wall, my attacker raced away. I heard his steps pounding up the stairs. Seconds after that, my father arrived and was looming in the stall door looking down on me. He scooped me up and ran his hands all over me to make sure nothing was broken, and then raced after my assailant. By the time that he got up the stairs, the man had made it out of the bank and down the city streets. My father was a combat marine from World War II, and also been a boxing champion of the 7th Fleet, and he later told me that my voice shouted in his mind to run to the restroom right then. The attacker ran right by him. I'm obviously glad for the angel that stopped the assault upon me. I'm equally glad that he chased off the guy before my dad could get there, because my dad would surely have beaten him to death, no doubt about it. That angel saved us both, me from the attacker, and my father from going to jail. From 5 years old till 10 when we moved, there was a ghost or a demon lady or something that visited me every single night. And I have a lot of stories of her coming into my room and just kind of staring at me, but I have a few that stay in my memory the most. So, I'm now 25 years old with 2 daughters of my own, and I'm so paranoid that she'll somehow mess with my kids too, that I pray to God often that she doesn't. I would cover my entire body with stuffed animals from head to toe, and I would plug my ears just so that I could fall asleep. It always happened the same, though. I would be laying in my bed with my light on, because I couldn't sleep at all without my lamp on, and even though I never helped, at least I could see a little better. But as I'm laying there trying to fall asleep, everything would just get extremely quiet. That's when I knew that she was coming. It would take about a minute before she got right beside my bed, but once she was there, I knew it, because I could feel it. I would peek out from under my animals and see her standing or floating there just staring at me with this horrible face so pale that I would freak and run to my mum's and stepfather's room and jump into bed with my mum, and then I could fall asleep okay. Well, one night, this routine played out. I cried and cried every night, begging my stepdad to let me keep my light on, and finally, it caved like always. I was trying to sleep, and she slithered in. I took off to my mum's room, and I jumped into bed. Except this time, my stepdad wasn't having it. He told me to go back to my room, and I completely broke down. My mum finally talked him into letting me sleep on the floor next to my mum and the wall of the room. I laid down there, holding my mum's hand that was hung over the side of the bed to comfort me, staring up at the ceiling, watching the fan rotate, when it suddenly got super quiet, and I remember thinking, no way, she can't get me in here with my mum, and I held my mum's hand tight. Then I saw her floating around the foot of my mother's bed, coming towards the side that I was on. She always had a white gown on and long black hair, and she moved so silently that it was weird and kind of sickening. I have never in my entire life so far been so terrified. I screamed and screamed, and my mother and stepfather jumped up, asking what was wrong. Well, what's wrong with you? And all I could say was that she's trying to get me. Mum, she's trying to get me. My mum let me sleep in the bed that night, and I was fine after that. But it's really hard to put into words just how much torment this lady or this thing put me through. I mean, I was constantly sleeping in school because I couldn't sleep at home. I would beg to stay the night at my aunt's house or my grandmother's. Even one time she followed me to my aunt's house, and I ran outside and sat in the middle of the street until my aunt got home at about 7 the next morning. It was just truly horrible. Even today, though, 20 years later, I'm a grown-ass man with a family, and sometimes at night, I lay awake thinking about her, worried to death that she may find me again. I've had panic attacks in the middle of the night dreaming about her too, and there's only 2 people in the world that even know about her besides me, and that's my wife and mother. And well, now too, whoever listens to this horribly put together story that I'm sure some won't even believe. But for me, it's the most real thing that I've ever experienced. By the way too, this is just one of the times that I really remember. There's about probably 10 that stick in my mind. But anyway, there it is, and thanks for listening. Now, to this day, I still cannot explain this. I don't know what happened this night, but it was about 11 and I was winding down for the night. I did my normal nightly routine, which included using the restroom and leaving a light on in the bathroom. Important for later. I do this so that I can see better when going to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. So I climbed into bed and prepared to go to sleep. When not even 3 minutes into me laying down, with my eyes closed, I hear very clearly the voice of a woman whisper in my ear, "I am here." At that point, I shot up right out of bed, but before I could do anything else, I hear footsteps walking up to my door and stop right outside of it. Now, this could have been a random noise, I admit, but what was worse is that I would see the shadow of 2 feet standing just on the other side of my door due to the light coming from the bathroom. At this point, I could barely move from the seated position that I was in my bed. After about 5 minutes, I decided to turn on my TV so that I had some background noise. As the TV was powering on, though, I started to hear the sound of someone breathing coming from under my bed. And I know that it wasn't just me because I could hear it even when I held my breath. So, naturally, I was in absolute terror and I could barely move from my bed, and I stayed that way for about another 2 or so hours. I don't remember why exactly, but at some point, I needed to get out of bed and grab something, but I still occasionally was hearing breathing from under my bed. I felt better getting up, knowing that I had a knife on my bedstand and I could defend myself if needed, so I got out of bed and decided to look underneath. I grabbed a flashlight and my knife and then looked, and to my shock, there was nothing. This definitely cleared up a little bit of the terror that I was feeling, but there were still feet on the other side of my door that had been standing there now for 2 hours. So I built up the courage and I opened the door quickly, and yet again, there was nothing there. Even after clearing this up, I still didn't sleep at all that night, and to this day, I cannot fathom what happened that night. I don't know how to explain it, or if there even is an explanation, but if any of you guys have any thoughts on what it could have been, could you please let me know, because this happened about a month ago, and I haven't had any other experiences near this since, but it's left me pretty shaken. So this happened in an old farmhouse a few miles away from where I live, and the case is actually unsolved to this day. I live in Bavaria, Germany. It's an area with a lot of mountains and forests, and the whole thing happened around 100 years ago. So the family who lived in the farmhouse, along with 2 workers there, experienced many paranormal things, like foot trails in the snow which just led to nowhere a few meters into the forest, strange sounds at night, and the youngest daughter telling the family that she was often visited by a tall man at night. Anyways, one morning, the whole family was just found dead in their beds. Everyone had their head smashed in with a blunt object. There were no signs that someone broke in, and the doors were all locked when the police arrived. Also, nothing was taken from the family, not even a golden necklace that the mother owned, which was right beside her bed, and should have been obvious to any burglar. The police also stated that There had been a lot of hate involved in the crime because of the brutality. The police investigated the crime scene, but they didn't find anything. Another weird thing happened in the barn too. They locked it to investigate it later because there wasn't anything remarkable at first, but when they returned later, there was a rope that was hanging with a knot from the ceiling. No one knew how it got there, and it definitely wasn't there in the first place. And well, the case is around 100 years old, and if it happened nowadays, the police would have probably been able to solve it with modern technology. But the paranormal things surrounding it really creep me out. I've never visited the farmhouse, but many people say that it's still haunted, and I'm not sure about all that, but it's a disturbing story, to say the least. When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug, or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from there they divorced, and my mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone, and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me, as this was not the first time. I often came home alone to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they'd gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge and whatnot. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. But we lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town, and I knew most of the people, if not by name then by face, enough to wave and small chat with, and had never before been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, though, I was staying up late watching television. I remember that I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on USA Channel, and had most of the lights on in the house, not because I was afraid, but because at 13, I wasn't really concerned with electricity bills or saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected with my little bubble of a home. As I was watching the movie, though, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking that it was probably just the neighbours. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party and people over for the holiday season, and about halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house just suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze, because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait it out. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen where the back door is, and my heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I had heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified, and when footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could to make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew that I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark in the ottoman, from playing hide-and-go-seek in the dark many, many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream, but I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from the hiding spot and ran down the hallway, and I believe the only reason why I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to even get to the front door, unlock it, and open it in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. When I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue-fronted Amazon, and I named him Boo. Because it was October and close to Halloween, Boo had a large iron cage. It could have been metal, but very large and sturdy and like 6 feet tall, and it was kept in my room despite the fact that Boo, like me, pretty much had the run of the house whenever he wanted. Now, as I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and I locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you could easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. I mean, it didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking and on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that, it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but it was as if they were genuinely amused. And it was that laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized that Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in. Because suddenly, they threw themselves at the door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement, awoke and began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly, I don't remember screaming, and I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I crawled under my bed, well, couch. It was a bunk with a futon on the bottom, metal, and then I just waited. Several minutes passed, and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he'd stopped, and though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure, I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid that he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. And it was also several feet off the ground, as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed terrified for what felt like hours, honestly. I must have fallen asleep too, because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why, and scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there. I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside, and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out of a window is actually a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated human being. But once I got back on my feet, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared, but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, no terrifying men leering at me, basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid I was and just how this could have turned out, and I wish I could have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go for help, but thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, and anywhere I thought that even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mum's bedroom so that I could check it, and then relocked it afterwards. And when I was positive that there was nobody there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open, and that the main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows in the front door, and then I called my mum, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a co-worker who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mum still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on forward. Oh, and by the way, my mum actually had to help lift me back into the bedroom window so that I could move Boo's cage out of the corner between my bedroom door and the closet, and we never had another incident at the house, and we moved into town to an apartment about a year later. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I live in a very religious state, and grew up in a pretty religious family too, but I myself have never been religious or even spiritual. I'm an atheist, horror enthusiast, and the paranormal has never been something that scared me, but it's always something that I've been interested in. My hood rat friends and I love to go and explore abandoned towns and buildings. I've been doing this since I was about 16 and never had any scary encounters other than some rats and raccoons. This past summer, my friend suggested that we go visit one of the state's oldest cemeteries that's about 30 minutes up a canyon that I live right next to. As we entered the tiny town, maybe 30 very old houses, he took me down a separate street to show me an old abandoned schoolhouse. Normally, we would get out and go and explore, but it was the middle of the day and raining heavily, so we kind of just passed by. There's a plaque on the top of the school that reads 1904, and is surrounded by other very old abandoned cabins. All of the entryways were boarded up, and it looked like as if there was no way in. It was an absolutely beautiful building, though, and I was very intrigued. So, the next night, I decided to go back up there with another friend of mine. But we both get off work super late, so we didn't even end up heading there until about 1:30 in the morning. The drive up the canyon was fine, and we listened to music and joked the entire time, but the second that we turned onto the road to lead us into the small town, I just felt sick to my stomach. I honestly can't even explain that exact feeling that I felt, other than just pure terror and dread. I kept trying to write it off as just general anxiety from driving so far in the dark, but as we got closer to the school, the worse the feeling became. As we approached the building, I nervously suggested that we just drive around to see the building 360. As we did, I looked down at one of the doors that was completely boarded off the night before, and that one door was now open. Mind you, it had been raining for the past 48 hours, and there was just no way that someone would have went down there and opened that door. We pulled up down the street though of the school next to one of the much older, very abandoned cabins. Reluctantly, I got out of the car and locked the doors. I thought that maybe I was overreacting and I just needed to take a Xanax or something and calm myself down. But when I looked at my friend, I could tell that he was super uneasy as well. Very out of character for both of us, to be honest. But we started walking up the street towards the schoolhouse regardless. The feeling in my stomach got worse, and before I know it, we're standing on the road right in front of the schoolhouse. I looked down at my feet, about to step on the grass. Every single fiber in my body was telling me not to step into the property. I've never felt this feeling before, and I've never been this scared in my entire life. I wrapped my arm around my friends, and I forced myself to step onto the grass, even though I knew that I shouldn't have. We started walking around outside the building just to get a closer look of the outside. We were about 15 steps in when we came around the side of the building to a ton of trees. Before I could even open my mouth, though, to express how fearful I was, my eyes just welled up with tears, and at the exact same time, we both just stopped walking. Neither of us could physically take another step, no matter how hard either of us tried, and we looked at each other, and without saying a word, we both bolted back to my car. On the ride home, we both came clean and told each other how scared we were. My friend got really quiet and said, "I don't believe in the paranormal, but when we first drove around the school, I swear to you that I looked up and I saw a girl staring at me from the windows." The scary thing about this isn't just the fact that he saw this, though, because there's little to no information about this town or building whatsoever. But the one and only thing that I found on the school was 2 separate Facebook posts. One saying, I wanted to go in and explore this building, but as I drove towards it, I got such a bad feeling that I had to turn around in my car and leave. I felt like I was being stared at the entire time, and I lived across the street. But one day I opened my window to find a little girl staring at me from one of the windows in the school. The rest of the night, though, I was just too scared to sleep. I ended up calling my friend over, and we sat on the couch in my living room and watched Disney films to make us feel better. But in the days passing, I couldn't help but feel like I just wasn't alone anymore. I kept having super strange and vivid dreams, and didn't feel comfortable sleeping in my own room anymore. Flash forward a few weeks later, the weekend was my friend's birthday, so we'd all been drinking for the past 2 days at an Airbnb. My liver loves me, I know. But one of my friends and I went back to my house to grab a few things, and I decided to shower while we were there. He was super tired and still a little bit intoxicated, and I told him that he could lay down on the couch in my room and take a nap while I showered. After I'd showered and gotten dressed, I walked back into my room, and as long as I live, I will never forget this moment. My friend, mind you, was half drunk and half asleep, looks up at me and says, "Who's the guy in your closet?" It didn't really register to me at first, so I laughed and replied, "There's nobody in my closet." He looked at me very seriously and said, "No, there's a man standing in your closet." He then woke up fully and explained that he was having a strange dream, but then it clicked. I felt that overwhelming sense of dread flow over me again, and I think that I may have brought something home with me. In the end, and I know that this sounds crazy, but I ended up begging my mother to have a priest come over and bless our home. Again, very out of character for me because, honestly, I don't believe in this stuff. But after the blessing, I can't explain it, but I immediately felt comfortable and happy in my house again. I think that may be more of a mental thing for me. I don't know. Just being raised in a strict religious household made me do it. But I'm definitely not religious in any aspect. To be honest, I still don't know what to make of this experience, and I don't know why I reacted the way that I did. I don't know what I believe anymore, but I'm convinced that there was something watching over me that night that I went to the schoolhouse because I have a feeling that if I had actually went in, things would have been a lot worse. This was something that happened in my freshman year of college. Being new to a campus that I didn't have many friends on, I began seeking out some cool people to hang out with as I had long breaks between my classes. I quickly found myself spending time with a large group of girls from my math class. We began spending time in the lounge area of my campus and made some friends through there too. To give an idea, it was a relatively small campus with only a few buildings, and the lounge area was quite a small room with some pool tables and seats and whatnot. So, as the semester went on, we began making it a regular ordeal to all go to lunch or coffee at least once a week. Our lunch group quickly went from 5 people to nearly 20. Friends started bringing acquaintances, and our group grew. One kid named Spencer, who was a friend's friend, joined us regularly for coffee or lunch. One day, word got back to me that he was into me and wanted to get my number. I nicely told my friend that I just wasn't interested and that I had a boyfriend. A lie, I admit, but I thought that this would deter him as he came off as a kind of a non-confrontational person. One morning, a group message was sent out by a friend named Trish who asked if we all wanted to meet up for a coffee, and everyone for the most part agreed to meet. I arrive about 10 minutes early, and I'm used to being the first one there. But Spencer arrived shortly after me. He sat down next to me, and I exchanged a friendly good morning and a smile, and slowly the time passed, and nobody else showed up. We sat awkwardly for about 15 minutes, and finally he spoke up and said, "This is a surprise date, and I planned it." I think it's important to mention that I'm pretty hot-headed, and I don't like being lied to. And so I just got up from my chair, gathered my things, and I left without a word. The next couple of weeks went by without a word from Spencer, and I thought that maybe he had gotten the hint that I wasn't interested. Soon, though, he started showing up at the same time that I worked out at the school gym, and I didn't think much of it because our schedules were pretty similar. So, like myself, I just assumed that this was the only time that he had to work out. Soon, though, it went from him just being there at the same time to him actually following me around the gym. Whatever machine that I was using, he was always conveniently at the one right next to me, lifting light weight and kind of just staring. I actually had some friends that worked at the front desk of that gym, so I mentioned it to them, and they said that they would take care of it if it got out of hand. One day, I was squatting at the gym, and mid-rep, he walked up and pulled my headphone out, and proceeded to tell me my form was off and grabbed my wrist. I racked the bar and I turned around angrily, telling him, "Don't touch me." He apologized and proceeded to ask me out once again, and I told him that I just wasn't interested and that I had a boyfriend anyways. Once again, a couple of weeks went by, and the only contact that I had with Spencer was sitting at the opposite end of the table during our lunch gatherings. I thought at this point that he had finally gotten the hint. I mean, why wouldn't he, right? But then one day at the gym, I was walking down the hallway to the girls' locker when he walked up behind me and put both hands on either side of the wall behind my head. He said, "I know you feel the connection that I do. Why don't you let me take you out?" I quickly yelled for my friend Chris, who worked at the gym's front desk. Keep in mind, Chris is very large, 6'3", and extremely fit, whereas Spencer is 5'7", and, well, wasn't fit at all. Chris quickly walked around the corner to see what was happening, and came running down the hall yelling at Spencer. And it was at this point that he was then banned from the gym and not allowed back in it. One night, I get a text message from a random number stating that it's Spencer, and he wanted to apologize for what happened at the gym. I told him that what he did wasn't okay, and that I wasn't interested in him, and I'd like for him to just leave me alone from now on. He apologized again and again, and I didn't hear anything else. Thinking that that was the last of it, I blocked his number this time. All was well until one day I came home from work to a bouquet of white lilies sitting on my doorstep. Thinking that they were from my grandma, she does sweet stuff like this, I got excited and picked them up and took them inside. And then I read the letter. It was unsigned and just said, "I love watching you." I frantically started calling and texting friends, thinking that this was a sick joke, as they knew about how creepy Spencer had been. But all I got was concerned answers and honest no's from every single one of them. I panicked and threw the flowers out and made sure to lock my door. And later that night, I get a text from a random number that said, "You didn't enjoy your flowers. I saw you throw them away." At this point, I'd definitely had enough. I called the number, and the familiar voice of Spencer was on the other line. And I just completely lost it, quite literally. I didn't even let him get past his sickening hello before I just started screaming at him. He then calmly stated that if I wanted to talk to him, to come outside. I looked out my window, and there he was, standing right in front of my house, just smiling. I called the cops, and when they showed up, they detained him, and I got a restraining order placed on him after that. The cops then contacted me a couple of days later to let me know that apparently he has more than one restraining order placed on him for the very same behavior. 10, apparently, including mine, to be exact. I had late classes the semester after this, and I called campus police to walk me to and from my car every night after this because I was truly terrified that he would show up again and try and do something. Thankfully, shortly after that, I moved about 300 miles away, and luckily, I've never seen him again. Well, other than his every so often random Instagram follow requests. This happened a good few years ago now. Some context too is that I was in my early 20s, single and living by myself. Most of my family lived about a 4-hour drive away from me. I was working for a small call center that provided, among other things, phone services for a 24-hour plumbing company, and they needed someone on the lines at all times. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to whenever my boss showed up to pick up the line, which was usually around 6 a.m. So I worked in a building that housed several businesses of the same sort. Call center work mostly, though we were the only one that had 24-hour services. Because of the budget cuts, though, I was always the only operator on my floor. The only people in the building at night were myself and the security guy who came by to do his rounds twice a night. Now, because the line had to be on 24/7, I was never allowed to disconnect while I was there. I ran to and from the bathroom, ate meals sitting in front of the computer, and every once in a while snuck a cigarette at the window within sight of the screen. Only the light above my computer was on, and everything else was turned off when everyone went away around 10 p.m. or so. And so, I was left in this half-darkness beneath a spotlight. I desperately needed that job to support myself, so despite the terrible conditions, I kept repeating that it wasn't that bad. Things were usually quiet after 10 PM anyway. I could use the extra hours on my paycheck and didn't need to get a second job this way. I did a lot of reading and even considered going back to school because, if nothing else, the night shift would afford me plenty of time to study. So one night, around 2 AM or so, I got a call. I introduced myself as I always do. "Hello, you're calling so-and-so, and my name is Jill. How may I help you?" The guy on the other side repeated my name and then just hung up. Working phone services on the night shift, you get used to a lot of weird stuff, so I just kind of shrugged it off and went back to my book. But then he called again and asked if he was speaking to Jill, and I said yes, repeated the company name, and asked how I may help. He hangs up, and the third time around he asks if this is Jill on the phone, and I ask to whom I'm speaking. He hangs up again, though. And the next time he calls, he's breathing hard on the phone and tells me that he wants me to talk to him and he's not going to hurt me. At this point, I jot down his number and I start hanging up whenever his call pops up, which was the better part of an hour. This went on for months as well, and when he realized that I was hanging up every time that I saw the number, he began calling from a restricted number, meaning that I never knew if it was a legit call or not and ended up answering. All the time, this guy just keeps saying that he wants me to talk to him and that he's not going to hurt me. And the one time I counted, I hung up on this guy over 200 times in just one night. Every time that he would call, I would say the company name, and as soon as I heard him, I hung up. I obviously complained to my boss, but she did nothing. Instead, she just laughed the whole thing off because this guy obviously didn't know where I was, and he was only a voice on the line, and I was perfectly safe. Sometime into this, I started talking to co-workers, and here's where it started to get really creepy. He never called on my days off, when someone else was covering my shift. In fact, at one point, I changed my shifts with a co-worker to attend a wedding, and he didn't call that day. As time went by, I was getting pretty spooked by the whole situation, and the fact that my boss did zero to try and stop this only made it worse. My co-workers were sympathetic and told me that if my boss did nothing, that I should file a complaint myself, but I'm not sure that I could, since this wasn't happening on my personal number. None of them could really walk me home since I was the only operator in night shift. Everyone else was gone by the time my boss arrived, and I left the office. I got a little paranoid because, obviously, this guy knew my schedule pretty well, and even if I changed shifts and whatnot. Again, he would only call if he knew that I was on the line, which meant that it had to be someone who could see me. I started doing commute with my cell phone in hand at all times at this point, with the emergency number dialed in. Sometimes I did the whole commute on the phone with friends or relatives to keep me calm, and since it's illegal to carry pepper spray here, at one point I considered walking around with a box cutter in my purse, but that's how afraid I was. Now, one day before my shift started, I was at the entrance of the building smoking a cigarette before going up, and I see the security guy come by, same fellow who usually did the night shift. This guy is huge. I didn't really know him, and never spoke much to him. I only said good evening or goodbye when I went by his desk and whenever he came to my floor to do his rounds. I usually just kept to myself, and I never really made small talk or anything, just greeted him out of politeness, and he greeted back. He asked for a light, so I gave him my lighter, and he told me that he'd been fired and he was going home. And he went on to tell me that he always got the impression I was afraid of him since I was never friendly or welcoming. Those were his exact words. And then he told me that he was never going to hurt me, and just walked away. And at this point, I lost every drop of blood that I had in me. I went inside to tell my boss the whole thing and discovered that the guy got fired for harassing women on other floors, going as far as trying to corner someone in one of the elevators. The complaints piled up and eventually he lost his job. Most of the time his shifts would match mine, so he would see me come in at 8 PM and left before I did. I asked my boss for that phone number again to come forward on this guy and asked the security company if that was his number. And she told me that she threw it away. When I told her the whole story, she said that she found it cute. And then she asked me if I was sure it was him, because a voice on the phone is different and maybe you got it wrong. Now, quality assurance told us time and again that our every call was recorded, so I demanded the recordings. And that's when I found out that, again, because of budget cuts and whatnot, the night shift was never recorded, so I had no evidence. Luckily, once the guy was fired, the call stopped. I didn't work there for much longer after that, and for that, I'm thankful. Let me start by saying that this was over 10 to 12 years ago, and I'm in my 20s now. This happened to our family beginning in the house that I was brought home from the hospital to, multiple other homes throughout the state, and it finally stopped when we moved over 1,000 miles away. So, my family has always believed in the paranormal, as growing up in Louisiana, all of us had encounters throughout our time there. But the most dark encounters started in the home that I was brought to after I was born. My parents have always talked about this house, and is the house that they had the most activity in that they experienced, as all of us kids were just too young to remember some things. It actually started in my room as well. My older brother kept his toys in there, like the red and yellow car that you push with your feet, and it would move on its own just out of the room and down the hallway and would then stop. Our oven would turn on to extremely high temperatures when our nanny was home, and she would report people just banging on the front door when she was right next to it. But no one would be there, obviously, and when my mum would be alone at night, when my father was at work, she would get a creeped out feeling and looked up at one of the vents in her bedroom, and a green light would be coming out of it. This was honestly just the beginning of it all, as we moved to another home in the same city not even a year or two later. In the second house, we had issues with our second floor smelling like rotten flesh and eggs in certain spots, and it being a 20 degrees difference in other spots compared to not even a few feet down the hall, it was a bit weird. And this is the house that I began to remember things in, as we stayed in this house for a few years. The first memories I have of paranormal encounters were that I was in my room asleep and would wake up, but not knowing the time, and I would always feel as if someone was at the end of my bed and see a black figure just sitting there. It never scared me, and I was more curious than anything, but the odd part about this is that I remember having white bunk beds with nothing else in the room, but my mum swears that I never had bunk beds and that I had a small toddler bed with other things in the room. Anyway, after we moved out, we found out that a teenager hung himself in what used to be the garage that was turned into a tool shed. Owners tore down the garage but kept the concrete slab from it. The next house we moved to a few years later was where I experienced the darkest entities, and to this day I'm honestly just terrified talking about it. I was maybe 5 or 6, and I lived on the second floor of the house with all but one of my siblings. My sister and I shared a room, but she only spent 1 weekend a month with us. It all started with my older brother and I seeing black figures. He saw them outside his window at eye level with him, again on the second floor, and I began to see them sitting on a swing set. Now, to clarify, our swing set had our names engraved at the top of each swing, so when I saw these black figures, they were always sitting under my name on my swing and would be looking at me. I would also see them at the edge of our property next to the laneway, and these figures were almost see-through but had like red eyes, and I still remember it pretty vividly. But the one event that will always have me and my mum convinced that it was a demonic entity was that one night my mum was reading in her bed on the first floor, and my room is directly above hers. It was in the middle of the night, and she heard me screaming at the top of my lungs for her. She ran upstairs and saw me standing in the middle of the bed, screaming and crying and pointing to the floor. And I remember looking at her and saying clear as day, "They're here to get me, Mum. They're all over the floor. They're all around me." She grabbed me from my bed and took me to her room, and for the rest of the night, she heard scratching and banging and footsteps from my room, despite no one being up there. Things eventually calmed down when we moved to another part of the state. We still had activity, but not as bad as the last house. My parents got help for the addictions that they had, which I think that whatever this dark entity was had latched onto. We eventually moved to the west, and nothing has happened to us since. My older brother and I are the only 2 kids of us who remember this, and we both still have our hair on our arms stand up and our eyes water when we talk about these dark things. And I know one thing for a fact. I'll never be going back to that house again. "17 or so years ago, I worked IT for the large local hospital in my city. We also provided IT services to 7 other smaller hospitals in towns across the whole of our country and the neighbouring county too. My job was to build, install and fix computers and provide support, in person and via phone and email, to our 6,000 users. It was an incredibly stressful job, made even worse because I was the only person on the IT staff who lived in the city where the main hospital was located, so I was often on call after business hours too. When I began there, I was straight out of university and very, very young, as I had graduated high school much younger than most kids do. I was also very shy and rather anxious. But while I was unquestionably geeky and awkward, I am autistic, high-functioning autism, so my social awareness and skills are rather poor, and I find social contact of any sort intensely uncomfortable. Remember this, as it has bearing on what happened. I was still young and reasonably cute. I would never have been called beautiful, as I was plain and a little bit overweight, but people called me cute. I dress in loose, baggy, masculine clothing and don't wear any makeup at all, despite being female, as I have sensory problems that make fitted clothing and the oily feel and scent of cosmetics very hard to tolerate. So yeah, not exactly a runaway model or anything. Now, I was in my early 20s when this happened, but my shyness and immature social skills made me seem more like a young teen than an adult. I'm also asexual, someone who does not experience sexual attraction or sexual needs, so I choose not to date. The hospital where I worked was going through some repairs and upgrades, one of these being the replacement of the antique HVAC system in the main building in the hospital campus. They brought in a major company to assess the hospital's needs, choose an appropriate system, and install it. This meant that one of the representatives from that company would be present at the hospital daily. He was given an office beside the one belonging to the head of the hospital maintenance, and I was directed to get him a computer and set him up on the network. But when I got to his office and began installing the computer, things started getting weird pretty much immediately. This was the first time that I'd met the man, who I'll call Andrew here, for the sake of my own safety and privacy. This guy was at least 20 years older than I was, rather reedy looking due to being very tall and quite thin, and very average in appearance. Your typical kind of forgettable middle-aged man. But he just would not take his eyes off of me. Being autistic, I'm naturally very uncomfortable with eye contact, especially the prolonged sort, and this man just openly was staring at me as I worked. He introduced himself as Andrew and began asking me innocent, work-related questions, but these soon morphed into very personal inquiries that had nothing to do with work, like asking where I lived, whether I had a boyfriend, that sort of thing. I told him that I lived in the same city as the hospital, but not exactly where, as I actually lived right across the road from the hospital and didn't want him knowing that. I lied and told him that I had a long-term boyfriend too. Any questions that veered in the direction of dating or romance got a curt, uninviting, bold-faced lie as an answer. I was getting very uncomfortable at this point, but I didn't react as I would now. But nowadays, I would tell a guy asking that sort of questions that it was none of his damn business and inform him that he was being inappropriate and I wanted it to stop or I would complain to HR. But back then, I was very uncertain and petrified of confrontation and afraid to make any sort of complaint about anything, so I just kept working. I ended up having to sit down at his desk to install the correct software access, and while I was seated, he walked up behind me. I thought, he's just watching what I'm doing to access the programs that he needs. But no, he put his hands on my shoulders and began to massage them. And I froze and stiffened up. And he said, "You're as stiff as a board," as he kept kneading my shoulders, all full of knots. Yeah, well, if I hadn't already been tense and bothered by his intrusive questions, I most certainly was after he began touching me. It is very common for autistic people to deeply dislike being touched. So I tried to squirm out of his grasp, afraid to tell him to stop directly, as we were in a rather secluded, untravelled part of this hospital's basement, and I was afraid to make a scene and anger him. I hurried through getting everything done, told him to call our help desk and if he needed any other help, and practically ran out of his office. Now, I know I should have told HR right there and then, but I didn't. It was creepy, yeah, but I didn't think HR would be any help. It was so borderline, I thought I was just treading the edge of inappropriate. I did tell my boss that Andrew made me uncomfortable, but my boss forgot about it nearly immediately. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I was working in the medical image department, installing some terminals in the CT scan suite, and I was visible from the hallway, and Andrew passed, walking with two men from building maintenance, and as soon as he saw me, he began loudly telling his companions that I was cute, pretty, sexy, smart, all that sort of stuff, laying it on thick. He walked past again and again, loudly praising me and saying that he wanted to date me every time that he went by. The two men that he was with knew me a little bit, and I could tell that they were bothered and embarrassed by this guy's inappropriate behavior. But finally, I finished up and I just ran back to the safety of my own department. Another week passed, and I was heading home late, and I was using the underground tunnel between the main building and the smaller one used for solely administrative offices. It's a long tunnel, passing below a busy road, and I often took this route going home, as the smaller building was very close to my apartment complex. I heard someone call my name and turned to find Andrew hurrying to catch up to me. It was after hours, and the corridor was otherwise totally empty. I didn't want him finding out that I lived right beside the hospital, so I turned and I just ran, hearing him call my name over and over again. But being younger, I was faster, and I managed to find a good hiding spot inside the administrative building without him knowing where I'd gone. I had hidden myself in a network hub closet, behind the tall rack of networking equipment. I had locked the door behind me, thankfully, as I heard him walking up that hallway, trying the doorknobs of locked offices, calling my name as he proceeded. He jiggled the doorknob of the door of the hub closet as he went by, and I just remained there, silent and still, long after I heard his last yell, and after I was sure that he was gone, I snuck out and I just raced home. Things calmed down for a bit after that. A few months went by without me having any contact with him, though I still saw him around the halls of the hospital more often than I thought I should. I vaguely wondered if he was trying to follow me, but there was nothing conclusive enough to prove it one way or the other. But then came the scariest part. So, I was working in a part of the hospital that had been patient rooms but was being remade into offices. I had to pull network drops into these offices to allow computers to access the network. I somehow lost track of time while I worked, and the other people working there with me, the painters and the men setting up the new desks, they went home without me noticing. And eventually I was completely alone. When I happened to glance at my watch, it was almost 6:30 in the evening. I usually left at 5:30, so I packed up my tools and left the room where I'd been working. I stepped out into the long hallway, tired and thinking about what I would make for supper. I hadn't gone very far when I heard footsteps approaching and looked up. And there was Andrew, hurriedly walking towards me. I hoped that if I switched to the other side of the hallway that he'd rush on past, as he did seem to be hurrying, but there was no such luck. Instead, he veered straight over to me, grabbed me hard by my biceps, and forced me up against the wall. He then proceeded to pin me there with his body while he groped me, easily pushing away my hands as I punched and slapped, trying to get him off of me. For a thin man, he was surprisingly strong, and he leaned down so that his face was close to mine, and I thought in horror, oh my goodness, he's going to kiss me. So I twisted my neck and turned my face as far from his field of breath as possible, and instead, he just growled into my ear, "Normal girls like it when a guy wants them. Normal girls let guys date them." All the while, I was yelling no. But finally, my brain got itself out of freeze mode and I became angry. I shoved him hard, and once I had enough space to make the move, I kneed him hard in the groin and he doubled over, wheezing and moaning. I ran and locked myself into one of the rooms that I'd been working in. The doors were solid wood and the locks were strong, so I knew I'd be safe despite him starting to pound and kick the door. Only one problem, though. I had no way to call for help. I didn't carry the on-call phone during the day and didn't own my own mobile phone. But back then, mobile phones were not allowed inside the hospitals anyway, and none of the rooms that were being renovated into offices had telephones installed yet. I was completely trapped, and my only way to call for help would be opening the window and yelling out. Meanwhile, Andrew continued pounding and kicking the locked door, screaming insults. 5 minutes passed and then 10, and he was still beating and battering the door, slamming hard against it with his full weight. I began to fear that I might be trapped there all night, with him on the other side of the door trying to break in. I don't know what finally made him give up. Maybe he heard someone approaching or something, but suddenly, the yelling and the banging at the door stopped completely, and I was left in just breathless silence. I remained there, listening to the door, trying to detect the telltale rustle of clothing or squeak of a shoe that would tell me that he was still there waiting for me to open the door. But there was nothing. Just sweet, lovely, safe silence. So I slowly undid the lock, then inched the door open and peered out. And there was no one. He was gone. I knew that he might be hiding out of my view in another office, but I had to do something. I couldn't just hole up in the office for the next 14 or so hours. Knowing that it was a risk, I bolted for the stairwell and raced down to my department. I felt safe there, as my workspace was in the code access controlled server room, and only my co-workers and I knew the combination needed to get in. Only one person was still in the department, the woman who handled the help desk calls, and I began to cry, and the second I saw her, she frantically asked what was wrong. She held my hands as I told her what had just happened, and she was the one who convinced me to report Andrew to HR. I knew that HR would be empty at that hour, so I sent an email rather than calling, and then I just went home and became a little ball of tears, worry, anxiety, and horrified nausea. I called in sick the next day, but the HR staff called me at home that afternoon, and I reiterated all that I had already told them in my email. How he had been kind of inappropriate from day one, and how things had escalated so horribly. The HR director asked me to come in and write out a formal complaint form, and I did. Because Andrew didn't work directly for the hospital itself, it was difficult for HR to handle this, I guess. They did contact the company he worked for, but he wasn't fired or even transferred to some other client site. He was given a tiny slap on the wrist and told never to come near me or attempt to communicate with me in any way. I still had to see the guy at work nearly every day, and I felt very unsafe when my tasks took me away from my busy areas. This added to the stress of my job, and I began to suffer from stress-related medical problems like migraines, depression, and anxiety. I felt just very unsupported and unprotected by HR too. And about 18 months after that event, I quit. I was selling my old car as I'd bought a new one, and I posted it on a couple of selling sites and Facebook. I arranged 2 visits that day and was home alone, and it was broad daylight, so I assumed that everything would be fine. The first one came and made an offer, a little lower than I was looking for, so I said that I would get back to him later as I had another viewing. The guy from Facebook pulled up in a blacked-out Range Rover, and 3 other guys got out of it. I opened the car and explained why I was selling the car. And you know when you just get a bad feeling, like I wasn't sure why 4 people would need to come to view an 8-year-old car? Well, he asked if he could take the car for a drive, and at this point, I was not going to get into the car with him, so I said, yeah, take it, I'll wait here with your friends. He asked me to get into the car and said, what if he just took it? And I said, well, it wouldn't matter, that's what insurance is for, right? I was not getting in that car with him, no matter what. The 3 guys left and didn't speak to me, just to themselves, and I couldn't understand it, but it made me feel very unsure if the car would actually come back. The car was not worth putting up a fight for or arguing over, and I was questioning my life choices when he pulled back up. He got out and offered the same as the other guys earlier buying the car for his daughter. He wanted me to get into the car with him to go and collect the cash, and I said it was fine, that his friends could take him if he needed to go, but I had another viewing and I would contact him later. I didn't want to walk back to my house, as I had now decided to sell to the other guy, as they were just giving me the creeps. He then offered more than honestly the car was worth if I went with him now, and I said no and locked the car and started walking towards the main street, as I had seen my neighbor walking down and shouted to him and his dog. They spoke to each other, and then they just drove off. I texted the other guy and told him that the car was his and he was welcome to come over any time to get it. It was all sorted, and I filled out the V5 and off he went. That night from my living room, the black Range Rover came back and parked outside. I live in a cul-de-sac, so I'm set back to where we had been, and I told my husband, and he looked and said that was strange, and then my phone started blowing up. I politely said that the car had gone and that I was sorry, but I couldn't help, and the car drove off and came back again about 30 minutes later. This happened about 3 times that night, and it was just a bit strange, but I didn't think anything more of it, as the next few days nothing really happened. On the Friday, though, 4 days later, I finish work early and get back and get the dog ready to go out. We were going to head straight to the park and run like the wind, and as I got to the end of the cul-de-sac, the same car pulled up and one of the guys jumped out and said hello. I held the lead a little tighter, and my dog was thoroughly unimpressed. She gave a bit of a grumble, and he asked if he could pet her, and I said no, that she's a guard dog and doesn't like to be touched, and went to walk on. But then he grabbed my arm, and the dog latched onto his forearm. Cue his screaming, and there was only one other guy with him in the car, and he jumped out and started shouting. This dog is the most placid and loving dog that you've ever seen, and to be honest, it was a warning nip, as if she had meant to really hurt him, she would have gone through the bone. His friend was shouting and pulling him away, and I called her back and got her to sit, and a few neighbours came out and they went towards the car. And after that, they just sped off out of there. I haven't seen the car since then, but I won't be selling anything online again that means that people have to come to my home to see it. To pay off the mortgage, my family built 2 granny flats in our backyard and have been renting both out. At first, this concept was pretty terrifying if I'm being honest. Strangers living on our land. It felt like a blatant invasion of our privacy. Fortunately, the real estate agent and my dad both found some kind old men to live in either granny flats. Now, we were familiar with one of the men as he was previously living in our neighbourhood and would greet us if we walked past each other or engage in small talk. But the only issue was that he's a non-functional alcoholic, but he's always been kind to me, despite having some horrible habits, which often gets him in trouble, resulting in my mum having to patch him up after a solid beating and him being disowned by his family. My parents, immigrants themselves, tend to overlook his views and even lowered his rent out of pity. We honestly thought that he was a good guy, just merely a victim of circumstance. However, the first red flag for me was when he coaxed me into coming into his granny flat under the ruse of finding his phone. Instead, he locked the doors and proceeded to show me his stash of opioids and injectables and tried to engage in conversation about various medical issues, since I have a medical background and he was previously a night nurse. In order to escape, I had to call my brother without the tenant and leave the call running so my brother could hear me ask to let me outside and overhear the conversation. Being a victim of sexual abuse twice left me fairly shaken up, and since then I have refused to engage with this tenant alone. Recently, the final straw for my family came when we started noticing some odd things inside of our house. My dad found blood in his room and no one could explain it. I would hear footsteps inside the house when I was alone during the day and simultaneously causing our little puppy to go into guard dog mode. And a mere 2 hours ago, my mum was home from work, unusual for her at this time, and she suddenly hears the door open and someone step in and sit down on the couch. From my mother's recollection, she ducked inside the pantry and watched as our trustworthy tenant walked around our house, avoided rooms that had noise emitting from it. My brother is home due to injury, watching TV, and our dog is in there too. However, he did peek into my room while I was sleeping, directly opposite the kitchen and visible to Mum, before sitting back down on the couch. My mum soon confronted him, kicked him out, and regained composure from what she could only describe as a near-damn heart attack before going to his granny flat. And the man had no recollection of entering our home 10 minutes ago, playing dumb with lines such as, "Was I really in your house? Did I do that? I don't remember doing anything wrong." But what's evident is that this wasn't the first, second, or even third time. Back in 2012, when I got out of high school, me and my significant other at the time rented a trailer here in our town. We moved in and got settled, but I knew something was weird about the place from the beginning. The trailer was just always so hot. Even with the air conditioner on, it would still be 90 degrees. The back bedroom was painted this horrible blue color, but you could see some sort of stain on the walls under the paint. Think about the square or diamond mirrors that are in trailers. The stains were outlined under the paint. Now, I was working at DQ at the time and was talking about where we had moved to and just talking about how strange the place was. A lady that I worked with told me that that was the trailer that Annie got murdered in, and everyone in town remembers the murder. It was over some drugs, and she had been the homecoming queen turned addict. It was a big deal, and anyways, my cousin came and spent the night that night, and I told him what we had heard about the trailer. He started provoking the spirit and saying things like, "Come and get me then." And the electric starts blinking and a moving box falls off the table at this point. And after this night, everything escalated quickly. The next week we were laying in bed watching The Devil's Inside, of all movies, I know, and it sounded like someone had just shot a gun right next to our head. It honestly scared both of us half to death, and my partner at the time got up to check the rest of the house, and nothing had been touched or went off. We went to his parents for the evening for dinner, and to honestly just get out of the house after that happened. We came home around 12 a.m. and we got into bed, and my partner fell asleep pretty quickly, but I was just laying there. And that was when I felt like something was watching me. Our bed was facing the hallway, and I could feel something watching me from there. I wasn't having sleep paralysis. I just laid down, and whatever it was crawled onto the bed and straight on top of me. I could feel its breath on my neck, and it smelled terrible. I was trying to wake up my partner, but he was completely out, and I was crying and I couldn't move. It was holding my arms down, and I finally got my partner awake and turned the light on, and after that, I didn't go to sleep the entire night. Another night, too, we had some friends over for pizza and Halo, and I was making the pizza and I had a stack of plates on the counter getting ready to serve when the whole stack of plates just completely levitated off the counter. Everyone saw it, and everyone was in complete shock. We ended up finally moving out after that about a week or so later. It was the house I lived in as a kid. We only stayed there for a year because each of us experienced something, so as soon as we could, we moved out. I've honestly been wanting to share my story for a while now, but I've just never had the time. So I'll start by sharing the creepiest ones that I personally experienced. So the first one happened on my 10th birthday party. I had a few of my friends over for a slumber party, and we had our sleeping bags on the floor of the living room. The living room was the front of the house and behind our front porch. When you walked into the house through the porch, you'd get to the front door, and once in the doorway, there was a staircase to the left, a half bathroom directly in front, and the living room connected to the dining room to the right. The left of the dining room was the kitchen, and it was behind the half bathroom. So, like I said, we were having a slumber party, and we were doing whatever it was that 10-year-old girls do at sleepovers when I just got an uneasy feeling. There were windows behind the couch that were directly looking onto the porch. I remember not wanting to look anywhere near the windows. I was kind of sitting on the floor with my friends when, in the corner of my eye, I saw something bright on the stairs. I didn't want to look, but for whatever reason, I did. I looked, and at the bottom of the staircase was a little boy. He was pale, black hair, and had dark circles around his eyes. He looked calm, and he was just kind of watching. This wasn't the first time that I saw him, though I immediately turned my head and was just frozen. But while I'm sitting there terrified, one of the girls starts yelling that there was someone on the porch. We booked it upstairs and we locked ourselves in my bedroom and just sat in a circle and listened as the girl told us that there was an old woman on the porch. Each of us were rightfully scared half to death at this point, and then the crash happened. In the middle of our talking, we hear what sounded like glass shattering. Again, frozen, some of the braver girls who didn't believe us decided to go and investigate. We followed, and there was nothing. Absolutely nothing was broken. But we all heard it. It sounded like someone smashed the window in with a baseball bat. Well, We ended up sleeping very closely tucked away in my tiny room that night, and looking back on it, I don't know why I never woke up my parents during any of that. So another time, I was babysitting my younger sister. At this time, it was just me and my 3 sisters, ages 13, 15, and 2. I was still 10. My older sister and I were home from school with a stomach bug. My mum had to go and get my 5-year-old sister from school and asked us to watch our younger sister. We were sitting in the living room, and she was eating some snacks and had a sippy cup of water. The top to the cup must have not been screwed on tight enough because when she knocked it over, water spilled just everywhere. My older sister went to the kitchen to get some napkins to clean it up. When she came back, she handed me some of the napkins, and we both started cleaning. We were on our hands and knees wiping up the water when we started to hear banging coming from the second floor. We both paused, looked at each other, and we didn't say anything. But we both had that look of, "You heard that too, right?" We stayed silent and kept cleaning, then again, another bang. At this point, we stand up and are still silent, just staring at the ceiling. And then came the giggling. We heard little kids upstairs laughing. Then the laughing turned to singing, just little children singing and what sounded like a choir or something. My sister scooped up the baby and we ran straight outside. It was a clear day out that day, and I remember once we got outside it started to rain. We had no choice but to go back inside, but we stayed on the front porch until my mum got home. Now, before we moved to the house, I spent the first 9 years of my life in a house that we were renting. My childhood was pretty much heaven, absolute 1990s kid heaven. I never had any real paranormal experiences in our first home, but I did have some strange premonitions that came true about family tragedies after I started getting severe migraines, which is actually what I'm feeling a bit now, so I'm kind of nervous bringing this all up again. But anyway, our landlord was planning on selling our home, so we had to act quick and find a new place. I remember looking at a few homes and going to open houses with my family, and I remember the open house for this one. I stayed in the car, I told my parents that it wasn't the right place, and they went in anyway. Later that week, we got the call that we got the house, and my parents were excited to finally be homeowners, but I was still apprehensive, but also still kind of excited to have our own home. After the year that we spent there, they decided to take me to every open house afterwards to make sure the homes were clear. In fact, my dad still asks me to pick lottery numbers for him. Anyway, we finally got ourselves moved in, and it didn't take long to realize that things were just off. The house was 2-story, the first floor was the kitchen, dining room, living room, and half bathroom, like I said. The upstairs was a full bath and 2 bedrooms, and we were a family of 6 at the time. So my 2 younger sisters had the bedroom next to my parents' room, and the basement was converted to a bedroom for my older sister and I. I never slept in there, though. I always shared a bed with my younger sister in her room. The basement just had its own creepy vibe, as most basements do. And that's where we saw the woman in the wedding dress the most. I have to admit that my older sister was really brave to sleep down there by herself. But the basement had this weird stage-type thing in there. It was right by the laundry room with the boiler, and there was heaps of stuff in this area that was just one big step where we kept some storage. To block off the clutter, my sister decorated it with some sort of hippie beads, I think. Now, there was one time my sister was laying in her bed doing some homework, and my mum was in the laundry room doing laundry, when they started to hear the beads clanking into each other. My mum poked her head out to see what the sound was, and when she saw them swaying, she walked out and stood next to my sister just to watch what was happening. They then began to shake even more violently, like they were about to be yanked off the ceiling. They ran upstairs and stayed away from the basement for a while after that, and my mum was always scared to do the laundry after that too. She said that she always felt like someone was watching her down there, so she would sing to herself to stay calm. I can't remember the timelines of all of these events. They're all just kind of scattered in my brain, so I'll start with the events in the basement and the bedroom. So we went away on vacation for a few days, and the house, although it was nice, it started to get a lot of problems. One of them being mice. We never saw one, but would hear scratching, so before we left, my dad put mouse traps around the house. There was a hole in the ceiling in the basement where my dad had placed one, and when we got home, he went around to collect and check the traps. When he reached into the ceiling, he found the trap was gone, but found that something else was in its spot. It was a postcard dated from the 1930s, and it was what you would imagine an old postcard to look like. It was stained and worn, and it was signed and dated with a name that we didn't know, and we read, "Wish you were here." I wish we kept it, and I wish I remembered more about this day, but my dad got rid of it. He didn't show it, but I'm sure he was pretty creeped out as well. And he never did find that mousetrap. Now, this one scares me the most, even though I didn't see it. My sister was in her bedroom when she saw this lace in the corner of her eye. She looked up but didn't see anything, and she kept doing whatever it was that she was doing, and then she saw it again. And again, there was nothing when she looked up. But this went on for a few times when finally she looked up and she saw her. An old woman with frizzy grey hair, looking really disheveled and angry. She had a white veil and a white lace wedding dress, and the way my sister described her was that she was standing with her arms at her sides but kind of stretched out. They were by her sides but not touching her body, and her hands were stretched out. My sister said that she looked frozen and her face looked stuck, and as quick as she was there, she was gone again. My sister didn't spend much time in her room after that one, and she was the only one who fully saw her. The rest of us would just see the lace pass us in our peripheral vision. And so that's what I can remember of the basement at the moment. And now I'm going to talk about the boy. The first time that I saw him was in the upstairs bathroom. I just finished up in the shower and was looking in the mirror and combing out my hair. I know this is going to sound cliche, but the mirrors that we had above the sink were cabinets split into 4, so one was slightly open, which gave me more of a view of the bathroom, and as I was brushing my hair, I looked down for a second and back up, and that's when I saw him for the first time. I looked in the mirror and just saw him standing behind me on my left side. He had the same expression on his face as the first story, calm, but his eyes looked sad, and they were dark. His skin was pale, but for some reason I remember him wearing a type of scally cap, but his hair was black and messy underneath it. I, of course, screamed and ran to my mum's room, and it all lasted about 5 seconds. The second time I saw him, he didn't have the hat. It was the time of the slumber party, and we had this kind of banister type thing at the end of the stairs. He was standing on the last step with his elbow rested on the banister, and again he was just watching, and he scared me, but made me feel sad too. My older sister was the one who saw the nurse. She walked into the living room and just saw a nurse casually sitting on her couch. She was dressed in the traditional old-fashioned nurse dress and hat and everything, and my little sister, who was 5, was sitting in the kitchen with my parents as they cooked dinner. I remember watching TV when I heard screaming coming from the kitchen, and curiously I walked in and saw my parents trying to calm her down. She said that someone was trying to hold her hand, and she had her hands behind her back playing with the chair, so my dad tried to convince her that it was just her own hand touching the other. But she didn't buy it. She's 24 now and still stands by what she felt, and she said that she felt someone grab her hand. Another time with that same sister, my mum was washing her hair in the kitchen sink. The way my mum would do this is that she would lay a towel on the counter and she would lay on it, and our heads would hang halfway into the sink. So, while she was getting her hair washed, she was looking at a box of strawberries on the counter, and she yelled for my mum to look, and they both watched as the brand new strawberries turned mouldy in a matter of 1 minute. My younger sister, she was 2, almost 3 at the time, she also used to scream and cry about the mean man. My mum would always try to calm her down, but it was never with much luck. She would ask her what man and where is the man, and she would point to the stairs and hide her face away. The way the stairs were designed was that they were mostly just straight down, but towards the end, they turned just a little. She would always point to the corner of the stairs, and it was always the 5th step. And every time that we had company over, someone would fall down those stairs once they reached the 5th step. We never really told anyone that our house was haunted because, honestly, who wants to tell people that? But every person who came over and fell on those stairs said that it felt like someone pulled their legs down. But they all fell the same way too, and it even happened to me and my mum and one of my other sisters, and yeah, it did feel like that. But one time my mum was alone and she was sitting on a bed when, just out of nowhere, a pillow was thrown at her face. My parents saw a teddy bear get picked up off a shelf and carefully placed on the floor one time, like gently just in the air. Same thing with a Cheerio another time. There was also a Furby that we had. Well, what kid in 2000 didn't have one, right? And the whole thing would just go crazy at random times, saying things that Furbies didn't even say. We took the batteries out and tossed it in the basement, and even then it never stopped, even without batteries. And eventually we just ended up throwing it out. Now, when we were getting close to moving, we had one neighbour tell us that way back in the 1940s or 50s that a nurse lived there with her son. I always wondered if the little boy was there with his mum, the nurse who was on the couch. Another neighbour came by once for a cookout, and he had a bit too much to drink, and went on to tell this crazy story about the whole block was notoriously haunted. We never told anyone about any of our experiences, and he didn't know at the time, so that was strange. At the end of all of this, none of us ever really slept alone. We all slept in sleeping bags in our parents' room with our parents, and it was just an awful place. I still can't drive down that street without getting a sick feeling, and when I do see the house, there's almost always a for sale sign on the lawn. I developed awful OCD while living there too, because I was scared that my loved ones would get hurt. My dad was so normal back then, but after all of that, he changed. I don't know if something happened that he doesn't want to tell us about, but he's finally just now coming back around. Our next house was wonderful, but then a couple of years in, some scary things started happening there too. Some people have mentioned that since my family is sensitive to these things, that we could be like a magnet or something. But that's for a whole nother post. I'm really sorry about the length of this and how messy it is, but like I said, I can't remember everything in order. And if I remember any more, I'll make sure to share it with you. Anyway, thanks for listening, and any feedback or interest is much appreciated. So last night, my friends, my crush and I, agreed to meet at my favourite bar after work. I was a bit early since I got to leave work 30 minutes early, so I went inside and ordered a beer for myself. Now, there was a huge muscular guy with a long ponytail sitting at the bar, and the seat next to him was empty. He offered me to sit down, so I did. We made small talk, and he seemed nice enough. Just asked me why I'm all alone, and he kept talking about how I look so uneasy and nervous and that I should relax. It was weird, but he had an almost empty bottle of vodka in front of him, so I really didn't think anything of it. My friends finally arrived just as I finished my first beer, and we went to sit at a table. I had 3 more bottles of beer, and we were having a great time, and whenever I went to the toilet, that guy from the bar was there, asking me if I was okay. Now, that was pretty strange, but at the time I felt just a little bit tipsy, and everything was okay. At some point, though, I started to feel sick, so I went outside to have a cigarette and get some cold air, and the guy followed me outside and asked if I was okay. I was starting to get weirded out by that at this point. The bar was super full, but he really seemed to watch me all night. I went back inside, ordered a glass of water, and told my friends that I wasn't feeling well and would be going home. They all offered to bring me home, which I'm so darn grateful for looking back. I took a sip of water, and then it all just hit me. I ran outside and threw up, and I could barely stand up all of a sudden, so I sat down on a staircase and kept throwing up. My friends found me a few minutes later and kept arguing about whether they should take me to a taxi or carry me home. And then the guy from the bar showed up. He kept saying that he lives just down the street and that I could sleep on his couch. My coworker, who is basically like an older brother to me, got really pissed by this and told the guy to F off. They forced me to stand up, which was almost impossible at that point, and somehow dragged me to my friend's place where I went to sleep, hugging a bucket and feeling like I was going to die any second. This morning I wasn't able to stand up for hours, and when I did, it resulted in instant vomiting. It was 1 PM when I finally managed to go to the train station, get something to eat and drink, and head home. I'm still shaking and sweating, and everything still looks blurry for me. I've never felt like this, and I went to get a test done because of it all, and it came back positive for ketamine. So, on July 2017, 4 teens went missing in New Hope, PA. I worked the overnight shift at Wawa in that area, and from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., we get all types. The normal obnoxious drunks, cops, and the occasional construction worker or gardener in there for morning coffee, and just everyone. So, when yet another customer came in covered in dirt, I figured he was just a hard-working man in a blue-collar job. He had been in before, so we made small talk and he went on his way. And that was Friday. I didn't see him on Saturday, but then on Sunday he was in again. He got food and a drink, and after the normal "hi, how are you?" he just went on his way again. Monday comes and I'm working like normal when a few cops come in for coffee, and you can tell that something's wrong. "We got a lead on those missing teens," they said solemnly. "We're searching a farm down the road." And at this point, all of our hearts sank. It had been days since they went missing, so we were slowly losing hope, but this confirmed our worst suspicions. The cops were out there all night, stopping in occasionally to update us. Whether or not they were actually supposed to, I'm not too sure. But they brought in dogs, and eventually they found them, 12 feet down and covered in concrete. And it was bad. At the scene, they could only identify 2 of the teens based on their clothing, but there were enough bones to imply that all 4 were down there, and everyone was just completely devastated. Then the cops asked for our security tapes. And why? We asked, confused. We haven't had any suspicious people around. But it was then that they revealed that the killer, a guy named Cosmo Donato, had in fact been in our store Friday night and again on Sunday. His cousin actually helped him kill, but he wasn't in the store, and the dirt-covered man, he was that guy. I was obviously floored, and when I left work, I looked up a picture of the man that they arrested, and it was him. And apparently, he was covered in dirt because he had just buried the bodies, and I had made small talk and wished him a good day. This happened a long time ago when I was 12 and in my grandparents' village. We had a cow and an ox, and usually the son of a bull, usually just one, took all the cattle to graze, and at the night we would just take them back. Cows generally know where to go when going home. My grandpa had a male ox, and since my father was an adult and he wasn't there, I usually took the responsibilities. Basically, my job was to go around the village with the ox trailing after me, calling the people to open their doors. Our ox would grunt to call the herd, and all the females would come out. And from then on, I had to take them up to a clearing up on the mountain, and then later take them to the river. It was pretty easy, to be honest. The animals already knew where they were going. They were calm, and our bull was honestly a gentle giant, and so all I did was ride him and have a thin rope on his horns. If any of the females wandered off, then all I did was call, or in rare occasions poke her with a dull stick in the right direction. My grandpa said that if I see a wolf, which was very rare, a boar, or a fox, that I should stay on the ox. Not many animals dare go near an ox herd. Now, there's a dark part to the forest where it's very quiet, and even the bravest hunters won't go in there. Not because of anything sinister, but because it's just very slippery and dangerous. They said that even the deer and the boar dare not go down there. I was forbidden to go there, and honestly, I never wanted to anyway. So, it was an early morning, and everything seemed fine. I was on the ox going up the mountain. I was glad that he let me, because it was a hard trek up, and I saw that one of the females was wandering off. I followed her and left our ox and the dogs to guide the herd, and she went into the forest. I ran to her and got onto tying the rope on her horns, and I tried steering her away, but she continued. And she went into the dark part and stopped. I didn't want to go off in case she ran back and left me there, and that's when I heard a crunch and turned. And there was a really old man walking towards us. He looked frail with dirty clothes and a long beard, and I was scared, so I laid on the ox clinging to her, not wanting to fall if she ran. Oxen aren't like bulls, and they don't jump and kick when scared. They either attack with their horns and trample, or they just bolt. And so I was ready to hold on no matter what she chose. Our oxen don't take kindly to strangers, and before I took them out, I had to go to every house and have the ox owner introduce me to the animal. That way they saw that their owner trusts me and their herd leader or ox trusts me as well. I knew that she was going to either attack or bolt, but it surprised me when she just kind of stood there. The stranger came up to us and petted her on the head, whispering something that I didn't understand. He looked at me and his eyes were completely white. And then he turned around and left, and he just kind of disappeared in the trees. Suddenly, the female grunted as if she'd just woken up. Our male does that noise every morning, and bolted the way that we came from. We found the herd, and I quickly got on our ox and yelled water, and he knew that command and went down towards the river. There were houses there, and it was closer than home. I barged in one of the houses and tried to explain, and the couple there stayed with me and sent their daughter to call my grandpa. I couldn't sleep for days because I just kept remembering those white eyes, and my grandparents didn't let me out of the house for gardening or anything, and I wasn't allowed near trees for quite some time. Later I learned that apparently they were protecting me from a lesnik, which allegedly is a forest spirit which can take the form of a man, an owl, or a wolf. It hates when people go into its part of the woods, and it can actually kidnap you. I later learned as well that the ox which took me there had fallen ill and apparently died. This lesnik thing apparently sometimes stays in the trees as an owl looking for an offender. And for years, when I went to my grandparents, they wouldn't let me be alone, and not just outside, but inside too. And after that creepy experience, I'm never going into those woods again. My fiancé and I threw a dinner party one time to celebrate his mum completing chemo. I hired a caterer. We were expecting 25 friends and family, so it was more than the kitchenette of our single-story ranch house could handle. We'd also only just moved in, so didn't have a lot of cooking staples. The caterer said that he'd bring everything, 75% done, but he needed to finish off some dishes in our kitchen. I told him that was fine as long as he was finished by 5, because the kitchen is centrally located and we'd prefer everyone be finished before the guests arrived due to the intimate nature of the occasion and all that. And he said that would be fine. So he arrives as scheduled at 12 p.m. We gave him until 5 and the guests aren't even arriving until 6, so it's plenty of time. And he smelled like actual dog crap. But his accent sounded European, so I thought that maybe he just didn't believe in deodorant or something. It was more than a sweat smell, though. It smelled like a sun-baked diaper, if I'm being honest, and that made me uneasy because he was going to be preparing food for the sick and young children. But I just made sure that he washed his hands, and then I left him to his own devices, worrying that I was just being presumptuous. Throughout the entire process, he keeps pulling me aside to ask me questions, though, and have me taste things and whatnot. I was super busy because my husband had to work during the day and pick up the surprise guest right after, so setting up the deck, decorating, putting together the slideshow equipment, coordinating the surprise guest. We flew in her sister, and I had to make sure that she got an Uber at the airport and her hotel had worked out and all that. And just a million other little details. So, every 10 minutes being asked things like, do you prefer this with paprika or without? With this is fine, whatever you think. Tasted to be sure was getting old pretty fast. When he was still there at 5:45 after 2 gentle reminders, I flat out told him that I needed him completely out by 6 no matter what. He apologized and said that there had been a delay because our oven wouldn't stay up to temperature. I'd never had a problem with our oven, but I figured he's the professional. Maybe it was a subtle problem that I'd never noticed. A little before 6 rolls around, a few of our friends start trickling in. I decided to tell him that whatever is done, and whatever isn't, that he should just put it in the fridge. But he's nowhere to be found. I go out on the deck to ask my friends if they'd seen him, and he's out there, alcohol beverage in hand, out of his chef whites, and now in a tee and jeans, just mingling with my friends. I walked out just in time for him to introduce himself to my cousin-in-law as a good friend of mine. And no, that was too weird for me. I met him in person for the first time just barely 6 hours ago, and I told him then that he needed to leave. And now he goes inside and gets his bag and makes a beeline for my bedroom. I'm taken aback and I say, "Excuse me, where are you going?" And he says, "To change." So, first of all, we have a guest bathroom clearly visible. Second, why can't he wear a t-shirt and jeans home? I tell him that I'm not comfortable with him going into my room, but he insists that it'll only be a second and goes in and shuts and locks the door. I couldn't even get a word out before he went in, and I just felt helpless. I was going outside to ask one of my friends to help me usher him out, but at that point, my fiancé got there with my aunt-in-law. I had to explain the situation to him, nearly in tears at that point, and he was like, "What? He went into your bedroom? Why?" So he pounded on the door and the caterer came out, still in a t-shirt and jeans, and my fiancé said, "You shouldn't be in there, you need to leave." And the caterer said, "Excuse me, but this is not your house, it's not up to you to decide." And my 6'4", 260-pound fiancé tells him, "Yes, actually, it is his house," and puts a hand on his back and guides him to the door. The caterer says, "I thought that she lived here." And he says, "Yes, my fiancé lives here with me." And the caterer goes nuts. He turns to me and screams, "You lied to me." I have no clue what he's talking about, but he starts yelling about how I led him on and starts calling me every name under the sun, and I don't know who he thought that the man in the pictures with me around the house was, but my fiancé says, "Oh no, you won't talk that way in this house. Find the door, now." And the caterer goes into the kitchen and starts throwing the trays of food out of the refrigerator and on the floor. At that point, my fiancé realized that two of his brothers, both currently offensive linemen at the college level, had come in and were on the deck. He signaled them and they came inside, and he basically said that this guy is harassing my woman. Since they're a family of all boys and my fiancé is the first to get married, they don't get to flex their protective muscles too often, and they jumped at the chance to toss this guy out. And then the party went on as planned. But I insisted we just ordered pizza and throw out all the food that he made, just in case, you know. My fiancé and friends kept saying, "Isn't that a bit much?" But I was insistent. But we went out late drinking with his brothers and got home at around 3:30 a.m. and I passed out in our room. Now, at around 5 a.m., I was woken up to the sound of the door opening. I figured that either he forgot to lock the door in our drunken stupor and it blew open, or one of his family forgot their keys or something in the house and didn't want to wake us up. His parents and his local brother have a key. But his parents never, ever, and I mean ever, let themselves in when they know that we're home. And his brother had had even more than we did and was definitely not awake and driving around at 5 a.m. It wasn't nearly windy enough for the door to have blown open too. It had been tranquil all night. So I wake up my fiancé and whisper, "Someone just came in the house." And he said the same thing. Probably my brother left his wallet or something. I figured that I was just being paranoid, and I tried to put it to rest when I hear a loud crash sound. And with that, my fiancé was up and on his feet in one movement. He told me to lock myself in the closet and call 911 while he went and looked around. As I was pulling out my phone, we hear in that distinct accent, "Hello?" And I realize that it's just this insane caterer. I'm not worried about this caterer physically overpowering my fiancé, or even me for that matter, so I just charge right out there. The caterer is shirtless and clearly on something, and he's taking the pictures that are just of me off the wall and holding several in his arms already. He lunges towards me when he sees me, and my fiancé gets between me and him, and I call 911. My fiancé tells him that the cops have been called, and it's in his best interest to get off the property. Caterer says, "No, I have to make sure that she is okay." And I say, "What? Why wouldn't I be okay?" And my fiancé rightfully says not to engage with him and feed into it. My fiancé stays between me and him while I climb out a window. He watches as the caterer throws photos of us on the floor. Fiancé didn't want to subdue or touch him in any way, so caterer couldn't make an assault claim, and he's begun to destroy our kitchen at this point, and when the cops come in, he has a butcher knife. Now, my fiancé considered going for the gun safe when he first got the knife, since we live in a stand-your-ground state, but he decided the situation was hectic enough without introducing a firearm. Caterer doesn't obey the police, orders to drop his weapon, and he says that he isn't leaving without me, so they tase him. It's honestly lucky for him that he only got tased and he didn't antagonize my husband into just squashing him. As he's let out in cuffs, he's shouting how he and I are in love, and it figures how I chose a macho thug over a sweet sensitive artist like him, and all women are whores, and just etc, etc. He continues on this tirade the entire time the police are reading him his rights as well. The police ask us to do an inventory of the house and see if anything's missing or damaged besides what we witnessed him do, and we go around and there's nothing. But then I remember that he was in our room yesterday, and I go through the room, and all my panties from the dirty laundry hamper, they were gone, and some toys were gone if you catch my drift too. We were so freaked out in the aftermath that we replaced all of our kitchenware, toothbrushes, and sent our sheets to be professionally cleaned, and had a cleaning crew do a clean on the whole house. And honestly, I'm so glad that we decided not to serve the food to our guests and my fiance's medically fragile mother. He also sent me a letter from prison that, thankfully, my husband intercepted because I was still recovering from the whole thing, and we gave it to the police, who helped us to get issued a no-contact order. And he was sentenced to 3 years in prison 5 years ago. So, he's out by now, but thankfully, we haven't seen him.